Everyone, and welcome back for yet another special edition of COS Live. I'm Rita Peters. I serve as the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And in a few moments, we are expecting a third and final round of voting of the South Carolina Senate on House Bill 3205, which is the Article 5 application supported by Convention of States Action. That legislation calls for an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution on three topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and constraints on federal scope and jurisdiction. 18 states have already passed that identical resolution, so we're more than halfway there. Could South Carolina be number 19? On Tuesday, there was an initial round of debate on first reading with about 3 hours of filibustering. And yesterday was much the same. There was over 3 hours of debate before a vote was taken on second reading with a resounding 27-13 victory. That brings us to today, where there will be a final vote on third reading. South Carolina rules require 3 readings. Looks like they are about to get their session started. I'm just going to give you a few more words of introduction while they do some of their housekeeping, and then we will go straight to the live stream of the South Carolina Senate. So today, even though this is third reading, this will be the final vote in the South Carolina Senate. But although the South Carolina House did pass our resolution last year, and that carries over into this year, the Senate committee amended the resolution to make it conform more closely to our model language and remove a sunset clause, which is very good news. However, that does mean that if we have a successful vote today in the South Carolina Senate, the House will need to concur with the updated language on a later date to officially make South Carolina number 19 to join the movement. That would bring us that much closer to the 34 state threshold needed to call an Article 5 convention and finally rein in federal overreach once and for all. We don't have word yet how long it will take to get the House concurrence in the amended language. But as soon as we know, we will let you know. And we are expecting, provided we get that positive Senate vote today, we are expecting the House to concur in the Senate amendment. So this is all very good news in South Carolina. Now, how did we get here? Well, the South Carolina team has been busy building support across the state and in the legislature. Over 45,000 South Carolinians have signed the COS petition. Additionally, a scientific survey revealed that 2/3 of South Carolina voters are in favor of an Article 5 Convention of States. South Carolina voters disapprove of the U.S. Congress by 83%, only a 10% approval rating. By a nearly 3-to-1 margin, South Carolina voters favor limiting federal spending, and nearly 80% of South Carolina voters favor term limits for the U.S. Congress and federal judges. The COS South Carolina volunteer team was our 2020 Team of the Year, and for very good reason. They earned the official support of both the Republican Party of South Carolina and the Libertarian Party of South Carolina. They've also recruited several high-profile endorsers who represent South Carolina in Washington, D.C. These include Congressman Jeff Duncan, Congressman Ralph Norman, and Congressman William Timmons. Former U.S. Senator Jim DeMint of South Carolina is also an endorser. The South Carolina team has sent hundreds of letters from citizen volunteers to their legislators and developed an impressive list of legislative co-sponsors. Last year, after passing through the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Laws 3-2 and passing the full Judiciary Committee in the House 14-8, the South Carolina House overwhelmingly approved our legislation by a vote of 66-42. South Carolina does have a 2-year session, so those victories meant we didn't have to start over in 2022 to get it done in the Palmetto State. So now we're in 2022. What's happened? Well, a subcommittee of the South Carolina Judiciary Committee heard testimony on our resolution for about 3 hours, including from our champion sponsor, Representative Bill Taylor, COS President Mark Meckler, 14-year-old Natalie Travers, an impressive young woman, and a representative from the Libertarian Party. That subcommittee, as I mentioned, successfully removed a sunset clause, which would have put an expiration date on the resolution. And they also made other minor adjustments to clean up the language and make it conform more closely to the other states that have passed it. They then advanced it to the full committee with a positive recommendation. The Senate Judiciary Committee voted by a 14-8 margin to advance our resolution to the floor of the South Carolina Senate. That's where we are today. And if there is a successful vote today in the South Carolina Senate on this third and final reading, then the resolution would go back to the South Carolina House. So today technically won't be the final vote because we still have to get that House concurrence on the Senate amendments. Stay with us after the vote today because we are expecting Regional Director Grant Martin to react to the final result and reveal the call to action for South Carolina residents. And with that introduction, I think I have gotten everyone up to speed pretty well. You pretty much know everything I know at this point about South Carolina and what's happening there today. So we're not quite sure exactly when in the session they will go ahead and do the third reading and final vote on our bill, which again is House Bill 3205. That's the one you should be looking for. Producer G always puts up a nice graphic there on the bottom to let you know when they're actually talking about our Convention of States resolution. But because we're not sure exactly when they're going to bring us up, we're just going to go ahead now and switch to the live stream. I encourage you to watch. It's always interesting, always educational, even when they're talking about other issues. But I definitely don't want you to miss this historic day in the South Carolina Senate.
The polls will close and the clerk will tabulate. 33 members are present. A quorum is present. Are there any petitions, memorials, presentments of grand jury or such like papers? The clerk will read.
Message from the Governor, Mr. President, members of the Senate. I'm transmitting herewith the following appointments for confirmation. These appointments are made with advice and consent of the Senate and therefore submitted to your consideration. Statewide appointment, member of the State Board of Technical and Comprehensive Education, 1st Congressional District, Mr. Terry A. Hardesty of Moncks Corner.
Education Committee.
Statewide appointment, reappointment to the Board of Occupational Therapy, Dr. Leslie Wilson James of Irmo.
Medical Affairs. We have no further communications. Therefore, we are on the introduction of new bills and resolutions. The clerk will read.
Introduction of a bill by Senator Gabriel that amends the code related to optometry mobile units so as to provide additional requirements for the operation of such units.
Medical Affairs.
Introduction of a bill by Senator Jackson that adds a section to the code to provide that the county legislative delegation may, by the adoption of a resolution, appoint the members of a county recreation commission that was established as a special purpose district prior to the adoption of home rule.
Judiciary Committee.
Introduction of a bill by Education Committee has reported favorable with amendments on S 923, bill by Senator Turner and others. It adds a section to the code to provide necessary definitions to provide youth patriotic societies may address public school students during a patriotic week about how involvement in the Youth Patriot Society may further the education, interest, and civic involvement of the students. Placed on the calendar.
Placed on the calendar.
Further introduction of a bill by Senators Gambrill and Goldfinch adds a section to the code to provide that when considering certain bids and proposals, an agency shall give preference to a vendor who meets or exceeds certain requirements.
Finance Committee.
Further introduction of a bill by Senator McLeod adds an article to the code to provide residents of this state who own or possess firearms shall obtain and carry liability insurance that covers losses or damages resulting from any negligent or accidental use of the firearm.
Judiciary Committee.
Introduction of a Senate resolution. It's by Senator Kimbrell and others. It's to denounce international relations with authoritarian dictatorships through the importation of foreign petroleum and natural gas, encourage domestic productions of petroleum and natural gas in the United States.
Senator Spartanburg, Senator Kimbrell, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, brief introductory remarks on the resolution.
You're recognized for brief introductory remarks. Up to 3 minutes. Senator from Spartanburg, give him your attention, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a resolution I'm introducing today on behalf of President Alexander, Senator Peeler, and 20 other members of the body. Many of you all have probably gotten emails, as I have over the past few days, asking for us to do something about gas prices. Granted, this is not the United States Senate, so there's little we can do. I did have a number of people approach and say, well, y'all should move to suspend the gasoline tax. Well, of course, then we're going to have people complaining about roads and potholes. That's not an option. As Senator from Dorchester said yesterday, even doing so would bring the gas from maybe $4.90 down to $4.80 or $4.78. So it's not going to really bring that much relief. So this resolution is in response. This week, the White House said that they were banning the import of Russian oil, which, given that I have in-laws en route to the United States right now from Ukraine, I support that move. But the alternative was to go to Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and beg for them to increase productivity and capacity. This resolution says we don't believe it's appropriate to go to Nicolas Maduro or any other dictator and ask for oil, and instead domestically become independent again with oil and natural gas in the United States. And I believe that is the best thing we can do for constituents back home who are worried about gas prices. And this resolution will be calling on members of Congress from this state to do exactly that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator from Spartanburg. Referred to the Judiciary Committee. The clerk will read.
Introduction of House Bill 3600 is a bill which adds a section to the code to define the term utility terrain vehicle, provide for the registration and operation of them on the highways and streets of the state.
Transportation Committee.
Introduction of House Bill 4866. It's a joint resolution to provide a 3-year pilot program establishing rural public school-based community canneries where members of the general public may bring locally grown products to be canned for their personal use, provide related responsibilities.
Agricultural and Natural Resources. I'm informed that the desk is clear. Senator from Lexington, Senator Shealy, what purpose do you rise?
I'd make an introduction.
You're recognized to make introduction. Senator from Lexington.
Thank you, Mr. President. All week long we've had Girl Scout Day, and we've had Wear Your Tennis Shoes Day and Wear Purple Day. Well, I thought today was Bring a Friend to Work Day. So what I did was I brought my best friend to work day. And so if y'all look over here in the second chair, I brought my best friend, and it's my husband, Jimmy Shealy. So if you would stand up and wave and let everybody see you here. So my husband's with me at work today, so if y'all would welcome him to the Senate. And if you get a chance, speak to him.
Welcome to the Senate. It's a pleasure to have you back with us today.
Mr. President,
Senator from Sumter, what purpose do you ask?
I'd ask the Senate to stand at ease for 2 minutes so we can all say hey to Mr. Jimmy real quick.
Is there objection to standing at ease for 2 minutes? Here none, we'll stand at ease for 2 minutes. The Senate will come to order. Senator from Spartanburg, Senator Talley, what purpose do you rise? Recognize to introduce the doctor of the day. Senator from Spartanburg.
Good afternoon, good morning, members of the Senate. Mr. President, thank you. It's my honor and privilege today to recognize and introduce to you my good friend, Dr. David Mitchell, been an orthopedic surgeon in Spartanburg for 30 years, has served the state in numerous capacities inside and outside the medical field. So, Dr. Mitchell, thank you again for giving your time today, and great to see you.
Welcome to the Senate. We appreciate your service. Senator from Orangeburg, Senator Stevens, what purpose do you rise?
Unanimous consent.
State your unanimous consent.
Mr. President, on the next available adjournment date, I ask that we adjourn in honor of celebrating the 103rd birth date of Miss Idella Davenport from Roseville, Bowman area. One of the things about Miss Davenport, she has always been a, as she called it, a young entrepreneur. And at the age of 68, in 1981, 84, she graduated from Bowman High School with her high school diploma. So again, thank you, and help me in wishing Miss Idella Davenport a happy 103rd birthday.
103rd birthday. Without objection, we'll recognize her in her honor. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator from Sumter, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, for an introduction.
You're recognized for introduction. Senator from Sumter.
And if I could get the body's attention for a very special introduction of a very special visitor today. Mr. President, members of the body, y'all will recall that just yesterday we had the National Commander of the American Legion here to address a joint gathering of both bodies in the House chamber. And I believe the National Commander was from the state of Texas. Well, today we have a distinguished veteran who's one of our own, a South Carolinian, and that is Colonel Loren Webb, who's standing behind the rail today with members of his family. And if you recognize that last name, Webb, he is the uncle of our very own Richard Webb with the sergeant's office. And I know Richard claims all of them. I'm not sure if they all claim Richard. But Colonel Webb, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And I will just tell the members of the body, Colonel Webb is from Ridgeland originally. Since his retirement from the Army, he has been over in Camden and in Kershaw County and has been very involved in that community. But this is a man who, if there was an aircraft in the Army during his career, he flew it. And Colonel Webb went to Clemson, Senator from Cherokee, and shortly after that, I believe he began a career selling nitrogen. But his love was flying, and so he quickly realized he didn't want to be in sales. He wanted to be back involved with flying aircraft. And so he joined the Army, was commissioned as a second lieutenant, started flying, I believe, airplanes first, and then went to helicopters later in his career. But Colonel Webb had his first deployment, I believe, over in the DMZ in Korea, had a couple of deployments to Vietnam, ended up being in Italy, and actually training folks over in Iran, which I believe is one of his more difficult deployments. But this is a man who has flown, I believe, some 85 missions for his country, had a long and distinguished 25-year career in the Army. And Colonel Webb has also received the Legion of Merit and Meritorious Service Medal, among many other honors. And of course, since he's been back in Kershaw County, he and his wife, Barbara, have raised two fine children, one of whom was a retired colonel as well, Colonel Tim Webb, and also his daughter, Melinda Rabin, who both are still in Kershaw County. And Mr. President, we've got a resolution that the entire membership of our Senate sponsored to recognize and to honor Colonel Webb for his contributions to this country and to this state. And Mr. President, I would ask that the reading clerk read that resolution at this time.
Thank you, Senator. The reading clerk will read the resolution.
This is a Senate resolution to recognize and honor Colonel Loren Webb, United States Army, retired, and to commend his meritorious and lifelong service to this state and nation. Whereas it is altogether fitting and proper that the South Carolina Senate should pause in its deliberations to celebrate the patriotic life and service of Colonel Loren Webb. Whereas born in Ridgeland and on July 6, 1930, he learned the value of hard work growing up on a farm and working at his parents' general stores. Also worked making septic tanks and pouring concrete at Webb Concrete Company Incorporated, still operating in Barnwell. Whereas in exchange for flying lessons, young Loren Webb washed airplanes at the local airport, a portent to his military service. Whereas he earned a bachelor's degree from Clemson University in 1953 in animal husbandry and was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army. He successfully completed Army flight training at Fort Rucker, Alabama, where 150 flight candidates enrolled, but only 50 graduated. Whereas Colonel Webb completed various flight schools during his career in Army aviation, he was qualified to fly many aircraft, including single and multi-engine airplanes and helicopters. He was licensed as an Army flight instructor for many of them. Whereas after flying along the DMZ to the Yellow Sea in Korea and back to base from 1959 to 60, Colonel Webb was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division support paratroopers at Simmons. Colonel Webb is also the beloved uncle of the Senate's own Richard Webb. Whereas the South Carolina Senate is deeply grateful for the citizens like Loren Webb, whose lives are marked with patriotism and excellence, and the members take great pride in saluting his exemplary life and service. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Senate, by this resolution, recognizing and honoring Colonel Loren Webb, United States Army, retired, and commend his meritorious life and service to this state and nation.
The resolution has been unanimously adopted. Senator from Sumter.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Reading Clerk. I'll also tell the members of the body that Colonel Webb has actually written a very interesting book called Born to Fly. I got a copy of it. If any of you want to take a look, I'll have it on my desk for the rest of the week and next week. But Colonel Webb, we just want to say again, thank you for your service, and to the family, thank you for your sacrifice, because we all know that when you have multiple deployments and with the job that you were involved with for 25 years, that your service is your family's sacrifice for the time that you're away. And so, again, Colonel Webb, thank you for your service to not only this country, but to your state and your community. We want to welcome you to the South Carolina Senate, and I would ask the members of the body to join me in giving Colonel Webb a big
Please
South Carolina
recognize.
Senate.
Thank you, Colonel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Colonel. Thank you. Senator from Darlington.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, it's really hard to end up following, but I think it's altogether fitting and proper. Colonel, as we stand here to pass this resolution for you and all of your years of service, we are indebted to you for your service. And you and your brother that's here, Mr. Richard Webb, what I came before you now is to tell you, one, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I got a chance to come over here 20 years ago. It's the same time that Richard came over here to serve in the Senate about 20 years ago. And one thing that he has embodied as to what you all have demonstrated is service. And what he always does is that he always says, I'll be there for you. And he provides his cell phone number to us 100% of the time. You don't see them operating around the same thing that you would embody. And I would tell you that I stand before you personally to end up sharing the experience that Richard has embodied, everything that you would end up wanting to have as a nephew, Mr. Webb, everything that you would want to have as a son. He does us proud over here, and he does your family proud. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Darlington. Colonel, welcome. We thank you for your service. God bless you. The Senate will please come to order. The desk is clear. Are there any requests for local bills? Senator from Aiken, what purpose do you rise?
I would like to request immediate consideration of House Bill 3679. It's a local bill on the calendar that affects Aiken County.
Page 3 of the calendar, H 3679. The pending question is second reading of the bill. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. H 3679 is given a second reading. Senator from Aiken, what purpose? You rise.
Unanimous consent to give that House 3679 third reading tomorrow.
Local bill on page 3, H 3679. Request for third reading tomorrow. Is there objection to that unanimous consent request? Hearing none, so ordered. It will receive third reading tomorrow. Are there any other local bills? Are there any other local bills? Hearing none, we are on the call of the uncontested statewide calendar. That takes us to page 5. Page 5. At the bottom of the page, H 4269. The reading clerk will read.
This is a bill relating to the designation of voting precincts in Union County.
By previous motion, this bill receives third reading, H 4269. Members, that takes us to the bottom of page 11. Bottom of page 11, S 230. The reading by the senator from Lexington and Senator Shealy. The reading clerk will read. There is an amendment on the desk. The clerk will read.
Amendment number 2 by Senator Henry has been previously proposed. It amends the bill, strikes section 2 in its entirety, and inserts section 2, section 16(3)(2020), subsection F, subsection G of the code, amended to read subsection F in a prosecution of a person who is a victim of trafficking in persons. It is an affirmative defense that he was under duress or coerced into committing the offense for which he is subject to persecution. If the offenses were committed as a direct result of being a victim of trafficking in person convicted of a violation of this article prostitution, or any other nonviolent
Senator
offense.
from Oree, Senator Henry, what purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Are we on the amendment number 2?
Correct, Mr. President.
Okay.
That is correct. Amendment number 2 is before us.
I stand to explain the amendment.
You recognize to explain the amendment.
This amendment changes the standard slightly on applying this affirmative defense for victims of trafficking. It states that it has to be a direct result of being a victim of trafficking, as opposed to there was language in the current bill and the current amendment that said incidental or related to being a victim of trafficking, which was, in my view, is too broad. A standard incidental to or related to being a victim is quite broad. It has, if you're going to use this defense under this theory, it would have to be directly related to the fact that you're a victim.
Senator,
And it also sets a standard of proof as a preponderance of evidence.
okay. Senator from Beaufort, what purpose do you rise?
If the senator would yield for some questions.
Be glad to yield.
Senator yields for questions.
Senator, looking at this bill, it's my understanding that its primary purpose is to create a presumption of coercion or reasonable fear of a threat for minor victims of sex trafficking. Is that correct?
That's correct. It provides an affirmative defense if you have committed a crime and you're a victim, because you're a victim of trafficking.
Okay, so the underlying bill creates the presumption of coercion, but your amendment would shift that burden, would it not, to the victim, and then the victim would have to affirmatively prove by a preponderance of the evidence. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I mean, in my understanding of this bill, and again, I wasn't in the subcommittee, is that we wanted to spare the victim from having to appear in court to answer questions, to prove something, and that this presumption of coercion or reasonable fear was meant to remove the need for that testimony. This amendment would require that victim to come forward and adduce testimony. Is that correct?
Potentially, they would have to make some sort of showing that they were actually a victim of trafficking. So, and quite frankly, it becomes this assumption that they're a victim of trafficking is hard to assess. There's no process really to assess that. So, I think you'd have to do some sort of showing either way. You've got to offer some kind of evidence that this person is a victim of trafficking under whether it's a presumption or they have to make a showing by preponderance of evidence.
But in terms of, and again, I understand this is just a matter of what do we want the policy of the state to be. In terms of where the burden of proof lies, the underlying bill would create a presumption of coercion in favor of the victim. The amendment, conversely, would put the burden upon the victim to show by preponderance of the evidence that there was coercion. Is that correct?
And let me say, they're a defendant. When you say the victim, they're the defendant in a criminal case that may be a victim of human trafficking, potentially, depending upon what evidence you have to show that. But it would shift that burden. They would have that responsibility of showing that. In other words, they couldn't just say, "I'm a victim of trafficking. You know, you can't charge me." I mean, that under the proposal as initially offered, you would just simply say, "I'm a victim of trafficking. You know, so I don't have to bear any responsibility for the crimes I commit," and that is a brand new standard in criminal law.
But isn't it true that that wouldn't be enough, because the victim could then make that assertion, but then that assertion could be rebutted by testimony from third parties that that presumption was not called for? Is that correct?
It could be, yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Fairfield, what purpose do you rise?
See if Senator yield for some friendly questions.
Be glad to.
Senator yields for questions.
Senator, shifting the burden of proof, how would that happen? How would I be able to prove?
Well, you would offer. So if you were a defendant charged with a crime.
Yes.
And there are other.
Hypothetically, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Yes.
Certainly, hypothetically, not you personally, but if a person
Yes.
is a defendant charged with a criminal offense, And this is a common, there are other affirmative defenses. You've committed this offense under coercion or duress or some other pressure that you have to plead that. You have to state, I was under coercion and I offer this evidence of this coercion.
Could you help me with an example of what that evidence?
So I testify that this let's say I'm a prostitute and
Well, if you're just joining us, I'm Rita Peters. I am your host for this special edition of COS Live today. We are showing you the live stream of the South Carolina Senate, where we expect the third and final Senate vote to happen today. We've just been informed that it might be a little longer than we expected before they get to the Convention of States resolution, which is House Bill 3205 in South Carolina. It could be another 30 or 40 minutes before the vote. We don't know exactly how long. It's always hard to tell how they're going to go through their calendar, if they're going to keep the order, and how long debate will last on various bills. So what we would like to do is to help set the stage for this third and final Senate vote in South Carolina today by showing you some footage of other moments in South Carolina this session that have led to us being where we are today. We're going to start out with showing you footage of Senator Campson's introductory statements and opening on the resolution. This was recorded just on Tuesday, which was when the resolution was introduced to the full Senate. Now, Campson was the chair, was on the committee. And so he's the one who got to bring up the bill and do the introduction. And he just gave a really wonderful, passionate opening. And hats off to Senator Campson, because he had to stand up there for a long time and deal with a lot of questions, some of them ridiculous, some of them just designed to be frustrating. And he did an amazing job. So we're going to bring you that. And then if there's still time before this South Carolina Senate vote on third reading today, then we will bring you footage of some of our grassroots testimony at the subcommittee. And I know you'll enjoy that. Producer G will be actively monitoring progress on the Senate floor the whole time. So as soon as they do get to our resolution there in the South Carolina Senate, we will switch over and take you back to the floor and you can watch the live stream. But I think you'll enjoy this footage. And remember, stay tuned after the vote, where we'll have Regional Director Grant Martin on hand for his reaction and commentary.
Senator from Charleston is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. What we have before us is a joint resolution to make application for a convention of states under Article 5 of the United States Constitution. And I'll start with reading Article 5. Article 5 provides two ways to amend the federal Constitution. One is by the initiation of Congress, and another by initiation of the states. And a lot of people are not aware that the initiation by the states is a means of amending the federal Constitution. The Constitution has never been amended this way, but it came real close in 1911 with the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment is the amendment that changed the way that U.S. senators are elected. U.S. senators used to be elected by state legislatures. And there was a movement in the early part of the 20th century during the progressive era that to remove that, to change that provision of the Constitution to where U.S. senators would be elected by popular vote in the states. And when the number of states needed to call an Article 5 convention for that purpose, The number that's needed is 34. 34 states need to make that application. After the 33rd state made the application, and it was clear that a 34th state was going to do so likewise and result in a Article 5 Convention of States, then the federal government, Congress, exercised their authority and power under Article 5 to go ahead and amend the Constitution in 1911 with the 17th Amendment that resulted in the senators being elected by popular vote. So it's never been done, but it became very close in 1911 with regards to the manner in which U.S. senators are elected. And I'd like to start by reading Article 5, or parts of it anyway, relevant parts. Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. The Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid to all intents and purposes as part of the Constitution when ratified by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states. So for a Article 5 convention to be called, there must be 34 states, or 2/3 or 34 states, make application on the same subject matter, and for whatever they come up with at their convention to be ratified by the states requires a 3/4, a very strong supermajority vote of 3/4 of the states to ratify it. And why did the framers put this in the Constitution? Well, I think perhaps the best quote that I've seen on this was from Samuel Jones of New York at the ratifying convention for the state of New York. When the original Constitution was ratified, it was ratified by the states, not by the General Assembly, but by conventions that were ad hoc conventions created for the purpose of ratifying the U.S. Constitution, and after that was done, they disbanded. And so there's a very interesting book I would encourage all of you to read that the senator from Edgefield sent it to me years ago after we adjourned, and I read it, and it's very, very enlightening, and that is a book by Pauline Maier entitled Ratification. And it's about the ratification debate that occurred in the states as they debated whether they were going to ratify the U.S. Constitution as proposed by the Constitutional Convention. Very interesting because you see how engaged the states were, how concerned they were about concentrated political power. They just defeated the greatest power on earth that had ruled the seas and therefore ruled the earth virtually for many, many years, and they defeated them, and they were very, very concerned about the concentration of political power. And so the book, Ratification by Pauline Maier, really gives life to that and substance to that debate that occurred, and you see the mind of those in the states that were voting on whether they would form our new nation, concerned about the concentration of political power. They wanted to diffuse power, not concentrate it. And Samuel Jones, in the New York Ratifying Convention, put it this way: the reason why there are two modes for amending the Constitution, again, Congress can do it, the states can do it, I suppose to be this: it could not be known to the framers if there was too much power given to it or too little. They therefore prescribed a mode by which Congress might secure more if in the operation of the government it was found necessary, and prescribed for the states a mode of restraining the federal government if upon trial and error and experience it may be found necessary. So really the framers, in their view, looked at this as a regulating valve, so to speak. Their number one goal in crafting the Constitution was to diffuse political power, not concentrate it. Just look at what they did. We deal with some of these issues on a daily basis here, but look at the principles and the precepts they embedded in the Constitution. Start with the separation of powers doctrine. You don't concentrate power in the hands of one or one branch. What happens when we do that? We're seeing today what's happening in Ukraine with Russia. What happens when one person or one branch has all the power? It always results in abuse of that power. At times, it results in massive genocide. And we're seeing that happening today because of the lack of the separation of powers. Because there is no constraint, no restraint upon Vladimir Putin and their form of government. There is no restraint, there is simply dictatorship. And that kind of power is always abused. That's why the framers, having experienced that in Great Britain, diffused political power among three branches: the legislative, the executive, and judicial branch, and equipped each branch with devices to keep the other two branches in check. We can pass a law, our Supreme Court can rule it unconstitutional and invalidate it. We can pass a law, the governor can veto it. We can override the governor's veto with a supermajority vote. The governor gets to make appointments to the executive branch. We get to confirm some of them, but we do it by a majority, by a vote in this body, and we may or may not lose from time to time. So they went to great lengths to diffuse political power, not concentrate it. That's what the separation of powers is about. Then you look at federalism in the federal Constitution. Some powers reside with the states, some powers reside with the federal government. Again, dividing political power. There's a big debate going on today about the Elections Clause in the U.S. Constitution. And the Election Clause says the states shall prescribe the time, place, and manner of elections, subject to regulations that Congress might pass. You see the framers' idea and their mentality in that clause. Diffuse power, don't concentrate it. Diffuse it between the federal and the state government. We see that that's vivid today. There's debate right now about the Elections Clause in the U.S. Constitution. And it's put there for a reason, to diffuse power. In fact, in Federalist 53, Alexander Hamilton put it this way about the Elections Clause: the power over elections had to be placed somewhere. It could have been wholly in the federal government or wholly in the state government. But what we did was we put it primarily in the state government, but ultimately in the federal government. Again, that framers' mentality: diffuse power at every opportunity, don't concentrate it. We see that in the Elections Clause. Samuel Jones is saying the framers created this provision so that you could tweak that balance of power. You could tweak that balance of power between the state and the federal government. So it's a device that the framers understood was in the same genre, if you will, of these other devices. The Bill of Rights is another thing placed in the Constitution to diffuse power, not concentrate it. I like to use the analogy. Some of you guys from the upstate and gals, you may not get this, but everyone in the low country understands what I'm about to say. The framers' vision was like placing 3 crabs in a bucket. And what happens when one of those crabs starts crawling out the bucket? The other crabs reach up and grab them and hold them down and keep them from climbing out. And so the framers envision the 3 branches having equal power so that they could keep the other 2 branches in check. And in Federalist 51, Madison said this in explaining the separation of powers: we put it in the Constitution so that political ambition would counter political ambition. In other words, he said, we harness political ambition to keep political ambition in check. It's utterly brilliant. You take human beings as they are, not as you wish they were. You wish they were totally benevolent, totally righteous, but we know that human beings aren't that way. And so you create a system where there is an incentive, you harness the political ambition that is extant in each branch and use it to keep the other two branches in check. And that alone is the harbinger and protector of freedom and liberty. It's not the benevolence of any one person or any one ruler. We've seen how that happens. You look at China, you look at Cuba, you look at Russia today. That's what happens when you put your faith in man. One of my wife's favorite Bible verses is that she quotes all the time to me, and she's written a great book on prayer, by the way, Daily Acts. I'm very proud of what she's done, but this is kind of tongue-in-cheek. This is not good theology, but she'll often say to me, she'll quote the passage that says, quit trusting in man, of what account is he? And she'll be looking at me square in the eyes. Quit trusting in man, of what account is he? Whenever I mess up, which is quite frequently. But you can't trust in man. You can only trust in the structure of government to keep government in check and keep our freedom in check. And so that is what the framers, this is why they put this in the Constitution, again, so that the Congress could amend and the states could amend. I'll quote Madison in Federalist 43. He said, the Constitution equally enables the general, or the federal government is what he was referring to, and the state governments to originate the amendment of errors as they may be pointed out by experience on one side or the other. And so I know some people say, you should never do this. You should never have an Article 5 convention. You should never have an Article 5 convention of states. And what I say is this, if you say never, what you're doing is taking one of the most powerful arrows the framers put in our quiver, and we're saying as state legislatures, we will never put that arrow in our bow and shoot it. We're just going to unilaterally disarm. We will never do that. I think the framers would consider that a complete lack of understanding of their vision of what's in the federal Constitution, the way in which they separated powers. Now, you may not vote for this. You may not vote for this particular application for a constitutional amendment. But I'm going to say this, you're dead wrong if you say we should never do this. This is an important weapon or tool the framers gave to the states to push back against the federal government, not to destroy the federal government, just to keep the balance of powers in check. The balance of powers under the doctrine of federalism between the state and the federal government. And so the amendment before us, we have an amendment to 3205, and what it does, it removes, it calls for a convention of states to address three things. Number one is term limits for federal officers, for Congress, for Congress. Number two, fiscal restraint. It's not explicitly a balanced budget amendment, but it is fiscal restraint. Get control of this runaway federal debt. And the third is reining in federal power. And so those are the three items that would be addressed, or the convention would be limited to. There are 18 calls right now for a constitutional convention on this subject matter. They're called applications. To count as an application, it has to be the same application, the same subject matter. If we pass this, we would be number 19.
Senator yields for questions.
So Senator, I've listened to your explanation, and I remember our discussions in Judiciary Committee. And do you believe all this talk of a runaway convention? We've heard a lot of people talk about it, both inside this body and out. I've thought about it a lot. But doesn't it bear pointing out that this, and you've said it already, but I want to say it again, the notion that we can just go shred the Constitution is overblown because the ratification process is not suspended, right? We're not suspending the process whereby the states ratify any proposed amendments from an Article 5 convention.
That is correct. Three-quarters.
The ratification process is still in place.
38 have to ratify. That's correct.
So, for example, and I think, and I would share this concern with the senator from Greenville and other folks that, you know, people talk about the Second Amendment might be at risk. If you had to politically be Nostradamus for a moment, do you think you could get 38 states of these United States to shred the Second Amendment?
There's no chance that that would happen.
There's no chance that would happen. I wouldn't vote for it. You wouldn't vote for it. This state wouldn't vote for it. Do you believe, I thought about this a lot and read a lot of literature from the founders on this issue, and I've heard people almost imply that an Article 5 Convention of States is sort of like a self-destruct mechanism. It's like when you have a plane that crashes enemy lines and you push a button and it kind of destroys itself. I don't think the Madison and the founders had any idea of this being or any intention of this being a self-destruct button, right? Isn't this a self-preservation relief valve? I mean, do you believe, Senator, that the founders are more concerned about a runaway federal government than out-of-control state governments?
Oh, they were more concerned about a runaway federal government. And the federal government has only become much more powerful, really by judicial fiat, than the government that the framers created. There's no question about that, which argues for a Article 5 convention to restrain federal power, because federal power has been increased dramatically.
Senator, I had someone come to my office and tell me, and I found this to be interesting. I'd like your take on it since you chair the subcommittee on Article 5. They said, well, Senator, you have to understand Article 5 is an outdated concept. It's never been tried before. Therefore, it's outdated and we shouldn't follow it. I was a little bit stunned, and I asked the question. I said, well, it's in the original Constitution. So if you say that Article 5 is outdated, aren't you essentially saying that the Constitution is outdated? I mean, I disagree with that. I think the Constitution is timeless wisdom that's still applicable. But Article 5 was in there in the original version. It's not an amendment that was added later, right?
Well, that's correct. And Hamilton in Federalist 85, we may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachment of the national authority. What I'm telling y'all is the more you read the founders and the framers, the more you understand they put this in here for the benefit of the states to push back against federal overreach and that disrupts the balance of power. I don't want the states to be too powerful either. I think it's important to have this balance. Like the separation of powers balance is important, federalism balance is important. And the framers had the idea that we put this in here for the states to push back if the federal government, in Hamilton's terms, the states could erect barriers against the encroachments of national authority. And so at the end of the day, that's one of the most significant things that struck me. The framers put this in here as a sword for the states to pull out and use if federal power and encroachment of power became too great. And I believe that is true. I think it is a tool for that purpose. And for us to unilaterally disarm and say we will never use it is really taking one of the most powerful tools the framers gave to the states under federalism doctrine, take one of the most powerful tools and unilaterally disarm. I've used the analogy, it's an arrow in our quiver. I'm a bow hunter. When I pull an arrow at my quiver, I want to shoot it at something. I don't want to throw it on the ground. That's unilateral disarmament. And for us to say we will never do this, in the eyes of the framers, I'm totally convinced. They would say you are unilaterally disarming. You are discarding one of the most powerful devices we put in the Constitution for you to push back against federal overreach. And that is the mind of the framers. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that if you look at the history. And is there some risk involved? Yes, there's some risk. I think the biggest mitigation of that risk is the 38 state ratification requirement.
Well, and Senator,
I can think of any number or combination of 12 states that would not let something really crazy happen.
I would agree. And to your point, when you mentioned this is the mind of the founders, I heard a joke once, and I thought they said it sunk tongue in cheek, but it's true to our times. They said, what would the founders think if they came back to 21st century America and they looked around and saw how things were going, and someone said, well, they'd start a revolution and start their own country? But they wouldn't have, because they built Article 5 in to avoid having to have another revolution. It's almost a political revolution of sorts built into the Constitution, as you put it, checking power not only between the branches, but between the federal and the states. So the last question I have, because we've had it brought up already today, this idea of, is there a prescription, so to speak, on what we're going to address in Article 5 convention? And it's my understanding that if we adopt this resolution, and I certainly hope we do, we'd be the 19th state to do it. So 18 other states have. Virtually every state that has done this has followed the same template of saying that this convention will be for purposes of proposing amendments dealing with the jurisdiction of the federal government in the areas of term limits, of balanced budget amendments that would reduce or limit the jurisdiction of the federal government. So aren't we just basically using one of the two prescribed ways to propose constitutional amendments anyways, because Congress is never going to vote for term limits, and they're never going to have a balanced budget amendment. We're saying here, this is a tool for us to make Congress consider, or the states consider, amendments Congress would never do on their own, right?
We are, Senator, and if we unilaterally disarm and never do this, the federal government in Article 5 has the ability to amend of course, they let the Supreme Court do it, really. They let the Supreme Court do it, basically, by the living, breathing Constitution concept. But if we refuse to do it, then we're just letting the federal government be the only one who can play in that sandbox. And for us to say we will never do this, when the framers considered it one of the most important devices we have, and I would be, again, I studied myself from being opposed initially to being supportive because I saw how significant the framers considered this to rebalance the power between the federal and the state government, and they were very, very committed to balanced political power, not excessive political power, because we are seeing today, when you go home and you turn on the cable news and you see what's happening in Ukraine, you see the consequence of concentrated political power vividly. And the people of Ukraine are living it and dying it today as we speak. The framers they were not all Jewish or Christian, but they did have a Judeo-Christian view of human nature. Because you develop that view of human nature, whether it's by theology or experience, you develop the same conclusions, and that is that man is made in God's image, or if you don't even believe in God, man is capable of good. As a Christian, I think, because it's made in God's image, but man's capable of good by observation. You understand that. He's also capable of great evil, because we see that. In a Christian theology, and Jewish theology, man is fallen, sinful, fallen from grace. But what do you do with a creature like that? What kind of government do you form? You form a government, and what kind of culture do you create? What kind of value system do you create? I'd say you create guardrails. You create guardrails in the form of law, in the form of a constitution, in the form of values and institutions that develop over the centuries through the crucible of human experience, like the law of natural selection in the natural realm that always produced the best results, because if you do things wrong in the natural realm, you get eaten by something else. And so you pass on these behaviors and patterns that lead to success in a species. The same thing happens in the human species. But it is as capable of great good. He's also capable of great evil. We're seeing evil today vividly, and we are seeing good today vividly, and they are both, and no one can deny that human nature is capable of both in the extreme. We see it. If you don't believe it, go turn on the news tonight when you go home, and you will see both good heroism, bravery, and tremendous evil. And that is the nature of man. And so you have to create institutions, and you have to create a form of government that restrains the evil and promotes the good. That's why value systems are important. That's why civic organizations are important. They create the guardrails, they promote the good, and they restrain the evil. And that's what's needed. And the framers understood that. That's why they separated power and not concentrated it. And this is part of separating that power. They gave to the federal government the right, the ability to amend the Constitution. They've done it a few times. And they gave to the states the ability to amend the Constitution. And in the framers' mind, that was exactly the way they did everything else. We're going to diffuse political power, give some here, not concentrate it. And the notion that we will never do this is basically just unilaterally disarming.
Well, and Senator, it's like, so essentially what you're saying is what the Federalist Papers said, and that is that if men were governed by angels, there'd be no need, or if men were angels, there'd be no need for government. If men were governed by angels, there'd be no need to govern the government. Since neither is the case, constitutions are implemented among men. So I appreciate your work as a bow hunter to help put this quiver in our pack, so to speak. Thank you, Senator.
Well, that's Federalist 51, Madison, my favorite quote of all. And it's the most provocative of all. And he said that, and so why do I say that the framers had this view of nature, which is tantamount to a Judeo-Christian view of nature? James Madison said it in Federalist 51. If all men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, no restraint on government would be necessary. In creating a government of men, over men, the great difficulty lies in this. First, you must empower the government to restrain the governed, because they're not angels. Secondly, you must compel the government to restrain itself, because the government's run by people who aren't angels. We're seeing that. Aren't we seeing that today in Russia? Aren't we seeing that there hasn't been the restraint on government that's needed? We're seeing that today vividly. For those who think evil doesn't exist, they're getting a little lesson, aren't they? Unfortunately, a big lesson.
I also came around. I was against the Convention of States, but I have also, after reading and reading and reading, have become convinced that you're absolutely correct. That era we need to use, and it's unfortunate that we're even having to have this conversation, Senator, do you know? Why should we be doing this at all if the federal government would simply live within its means? I mean, here we are in the state of South Carolina, and we know how to live within our means. I'm sure you and your family and your budget, you know how to live within your means. The rest of us do. We all do. We all have to do it. It's a fundamental way of doing business. And yet our federal government, for reasons unknown, has decided to spend $30 trillion above and beyond what we've taken in. So my concern is that there are those people that oppose it, and I think we have to continue to work to educate them, make sure that they understand that this is our opportunity as states. Those powers that are left to the federal government are to the federal government. Those to the states are left to the states, and those not to the states go to the people. But at the end of the day, it's the people, we the people who have accepted this government, have the right to call upon the government, do we not, to do right. And so if our legislatures, as the senator spoke of just a few moments ago, would do their job, yes, we could replace them. That's one option, and replace them and hope that the new senator or the new congressman would make sure that they got it through and they got a balanced budget or a physical restraint. We couldn't balance the budget right now if we wanted to. It would take a number of years for us to do that.
It'd be like like rehab from a drug addiction. You have to wean yourself off of it is what would happen.
And wouldn't that take a few years to do that?
It'd take a few years, yes.
And we'd probably have to do something to tie it to our budget. It'd have to be tied to our gross national product in some way, shape, or form.
Yes. And so this language does not use the term balanced budget. It does use fiscal restraint. Balanced budget is a form of fiscal restraint, but it's not limited to the balanced budget.
Back when Ronald Reagan, in May 23rd, 1987, he said, "I'm one of those Americans who has always believed the constitutional amendment mandating that Congress balance the budget is the answer to what ails us." But he also went on later on and said that in the event they don't, then we have to turn to the states, and the states have to step up to the plate and take that responsibility and remind the federal government. You also agree, Senator, that oftentimes, because there may be sufficient 34 states, that all of a sudden the federal government will decide we had better do it, or the states may very well take that power from us.
Well, Senator, historically, that is what has happened, as we've discussed with the 17th Amendment in 1911. Before the last application, there was one application left that would have called the Convention of States, and when Congress saw that it was likely that there would be a Convention of States called, they exercised their power under Article 5 and called and amended the Constitution themselves to add the 17th Amendment. And that's that would likely happen here too. Although, it would be to address these three issues of fiscal restraint, reining in federal power, and term limits for federal offices.
But then again, they may very well take those positions and fix them. If we get 33 and we're about to go to 34,
that's what I'm saying.
They may go ahead and take and do what they should have done without us having to go through this process.
That's the historical precedent. That's what they did with the 17th Amendment. That's correct.
And also, there were those who have said that, well, it's in the Constitution, but they really didn't mean it. But I think clearly, if you'll leave Article 5, it clearly says that provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year of 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the 9th section of the first article, and that no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. My reason for pointing that out is in the body of Article 5, it clearly says that we expect you people, you states, in this balancing of power, to use this from time to time in our federal government, even in this document. In other words, even in the Constitution itself, if they determined that some parts of it didn't work, or it wasn't working in the best interest of the country, then they recognized that it was necessary that we come in and make possible changes or amendments, even at that point, if Congress didn't.
Yeah, Hamilton and Federalist 85, the words of this article, talking about Article 5, are preemptory. Nothing in particular is left to the discretion of that body, meaning Congress. We may safely rely on the disposition of the state legislatures to erect barriers against the encroachments of the national authority. And that was their view of why they put Article 5. And I'll tell you another interesting notion. We've had the debate about nullification in this chamber.
Right.
Before you were here, but those who've been here a while, y'all can remember the nullification of debates that we've had. And Madison actually weighed in on that during the nullification crisis of 1832. And Madison cited Article 5 as the means to push back against the federal government, not nullification.
It's interesting.
He cited Article 5 as something that is a legitimate constitutional way to push back against federal authority, not nullification of a federal law. Now, we also learned in that debate about the Prince decision, and you can't commandeer state officials to do the bidding of the federal government. That's another limit on federal power. But Madison said, no, John C. Calhoun may come out and hit me with lightning, but no, nullification is not the way to do it. It's an Article 5 convention is what Madison said. That we put that in there when it's this bad where you feel like you need to nullify something.
And finally, as it relates to the protections of our delegates and not allowing our delegates to go out, you're comfortable with the language that we're trying to work to make sure there's limitation on our delegates. They won't become federal agents. They are state agents.
It's a convention of states, not of the federal government.
They are state agents. They are South Carolina's agents, and we control our South Carolina agents. And if they violate the rules or regulations, then we can immediately recall them, and they have no power to void ab initio their authority.
That's correct. And we have a bill that would accompany this that would establish an oath that they must give if they're going to be a delegate, and then a criminal penalties if they violate that oath.
You think that, and based upon all of your reading, are you comfortable that that will protect the state of South Carolina at that convention?
Well, I am comfortable. I wasn't comfortable initially, but like you, I've studied myself to be comfortable.
My name is Natalie Traver, and I am 14 years old. I have come here today to make it loud and clear that I do not agree with what the federal government is doing. They have caused America to be almost $30 trillion in debt. They continue to restrict our constitutional right to bear arms. They have stolen the value of our hard-earned dollars by spending money uncontrollably, and they have attempted to force us into their way of life at every turn. We need to fight it. The government has grown very powerful. There are few things that we can do to fight back in a peaceful way. I believe that there are many good people who want to do something to help, but don't know what they can do. Short of running for election, what can we do to prevent the federal government from destroying our country? The answer is Convention of States. By establishing term limits, requiring a balanced budget, and restraining federal government overreach, we can finally rein in the tyranny. We can still save America, but we are right on the edge. It is imperative we act now before the government grows too powerful to stop. As Ronald Reagan famously said, freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. Why are we here? Why are we in this room right now? Because hundreds of years ago, the Founding Fathers journeyed for months across ravenous seas, fought dire storms, and survived piercing winters to come to the would-be America. Why? They could have easily turned around and gone home to their warm homes back in Europe. They persevered, fought, never giving up so that they could escape the tyranny of the British Parliament. They fought a war against the strongest army in the world, and they won. They had the drive to do that because they wanted life to be better for future generations. We need that drive today. Hundreds of thousands of people have died for freedom, and now we are willingly letting those deaths go to waste. Today we are allowing the same kind of power that our ancestors fought so hard to escape to take over our beautiful America. Why on earth are we allowing it? President John F. Kennedy once said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." It's not about us. It's not about politics. It's about your duty. Your duty to your country, your duty to your constituents, and your duty to the future generations. This is about your duty to make America free and keep it that way. Yes, there are risks, but there's a certain amount of uncertainty in everything. I believe, however, that the benefits far outweigh the danger. Before I turn over the podium, I ask you to consider this. What is the risk of not standing up to the federal government? Just how much more we let them step on us before we say enough is enough? And by the time we decide to fight back, will it be too late? Thank you.
Okay, Miss Traver, how old are you?
14 years old, sir.
Okay, well, I got word that you were 15. You're actually younger than we thought, but I applaud you for, at your young age, taking an interest in
Hello, thank you for hearing me. My name is Van Mellon. I wasn't originally on the docket, so I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. From Kershaw County. I am with the Libertarian Party of South Carolina. I was an elected delegate to our convention last November from Kershaw County, and I'm also a registered voter, obviously, where we unanimously passed support for a convention of states. And I originally wasn't planning on speaking here. I just wanted to show my support, but I did want to take an opportunity to kind of criticize some of the criticisms that I've heard today that seem to bear inherent contradictions. One of them is about a runaway convention. You know, what was it? The 1786 convention is being criticized for having been run away. But I would imagine that all of those critics, in voicing their support for the Constitution that resulted from that, are glad that it resulted the way that it did, I would imagine. And the fear of losing the Constitution that we have now in said convention, which my understanding is that's not really a reality if you think about the nuts and bolts of how it works. But again, the Article 5 Convention of States authority is contained within that very Constitution. So how can you be against a Convention of States and be for the Constitution? You can't have it both ways. We all know that that Congress is representing their own interest. I mean, how many six-figure a year jobs turn you into a millionaire within a year or two of getting those jobs, right? And so we're left with the burden of what to do about that and how to reclaim the nation. This doesn't matter what your political philosophy is. As a libertarian, I identify as both a constitutional conservative and a neoliberal and a classical liberal. If you're familiar with political philosophy, you know that that's a very common thing for all Americans. We have a lot more in common that we agree upon than what the propaganda machine likes to paint the picture of. I'm for a convention of states. I trust you guys to appoint a delegate to represent the best interest of this state and not go on some crazy mission to, I mean, think about that. Think about that. If we get 34 or 38 states, each independent legislative bodies appointing their own delegates, do you really think that those delegates are going to conspire together to replace the entire U.S. Constitution? Is that a reality that you think is going to happen? I just think it's insane to believe so. While the wording might appear ambiguous to those who really don't have the mind for these things, I think every member of this committee does have the mind and the understanding of how that would work, and you could see how unrealistic that would be. That's all I want to say. I appreciate you guys giving me the opportunity, and thank you for doing what you do.
My name is Kimberly Snyder. I live in Greer, South Carolina, and I'm testifying in favor of 3205 to call a convention of states. I represent my family, my community, my church, and thousands of South Carolinian Convention of States supporters who couldn't be here today in our collective stand to defend liberty to the next generation. As you are well aware at this point, supporters of this resolution are in favor of limiting terms on Congress, limiting federal debt, and limiting overreach of the federal government on the states. What you may not realize, however, is that supporters of this resolution are also supporters of you. The country we want for our children and grandchildren, where a convention of states can happen to rein in the federal government, is a country with more power at the state, local, and individual levels. We are here because we trust you far more than we trust the bureaucrats and lobbyists and people in DC to legislate how we live our daily lives. We have voted for you to protect our freedoms, and we bring this resolution to you today because it is the most impactful way to not only protect our freedoms, but those of the children coming after us. I am 24 years old, I am not married, and I don't have a family. However, I grew up in a country where I could openly worship God, be educated at home, and learn to think for myself from a young age. It's my dream one day to raise a family and to raise children in these same freedoms. That's why I took off work today, drove 2 hours each way from Greer to tell you this dream and to ask you to support me in it. I'm not here with a radical agenda to change America or change the Constitution, and if I thought that was even the remotest possibility, I wouldn't be here at all. I'm here to fight for freedom and its preservation. And I believe, as our state legislators, that you have that same passion. With that, I thank you for supporting H 3205 and joining all of us and the rest of South Carolina in today's fight for tomorrow's liberties. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the committee. My name is Mark Meckler, and I am the president of Convention of States Action. We're the organization helping to move this forward nationally. And I'd like to say, first of all, it's unfair to put me behind Natalie Traver, because I don't think I can outdo that.
We did that on purpose.
I could tell. I feel a little bit set up, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'm here representing over 43,000 people in the Palmetto State who've stepped up, signed the petition, and said that they would like the state legislature to act in calling a convention of states. I'm beholden to those people. I travel the country. I've been in over 48 states in the last few years, 18 states just in the last few months. And I know what's going on the ground all over this country. People are looking at Washington, D.C., and they're pretty clear that it's out of control. And they're pretty clear that the place they need to look to fix what's going on in D.C. is into their state legislatures. When I first started in politics 11 years ago, I had a general disdain for all politicians. That disdain still applies to Washington, D.C., but having been in so many state legislatures, I know that the heroes of the United States of America sit in these legislatures, right here in your own legislature. The founders gave you the authority, and I would argue the moral responsibility, to stand when liberty was at risk. They told you that if things fell apart, if things got difficult, if Washington, D.C. started to ignore the states and the will of the people, they gave you a power that was unique among all members of the government. They gave you the power to call a convention, propose amendments, and actually ratify those amendments, thereby reforming the structure of the United States government. No doubt the vast majority of American people are in favor of term limits. We talk about term limits for federal officials. That's not just Congress. It means staffers, bureaucrats, potentially the federal judiciary. The vast majority of Americans are in favor of some form of balanced budget amendment. They understand from their own finances you can't spend more than you take in forever. They know that we need caps on spending and taxation. Finally, they know that the federal government does far more than it was ever intended to do. The federal government, there is a list of enumerated powers. The courts themselves have allowed the federal government to exceed those powers, and it's time for the states to rein it in. On behalf of the more than 43,000 people here in South Carolina who have signed this petition, I ask that you move this resolution forward. And I would close with this. You're going to hear people use the term con as a pejorative. You're going to hear them talk about a runaway convention. They're going to espouse fear. That's going to be their primary talking point, is that you should be afraid. America has never been a nation of fearful people. This legislature is not full of fearful people, and I would ask that you stand bravely and pass this resolution forward.
You are the senior advisor of Convention of States Action. I wanted to get you to weigh in on West Virginia becoming the 18th state to pass a resolution outlining its participation in a Convention of States. With Washington tuning we the people out, the Article 5 Convention of States is the last best hope in making this government once again a government of, by, and for the people. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong. Thank you for the great work that you do to cover this. This is another story. You know, one of the reasons Newsmax is doing so well and is growing is because Newsmax is covering stories that are out there in the public. You see energy across America, and yet Washington ignores it and the mainstream media ignores it. One of those things is the Convention of States. We're now, as you mentioned, 18 states, 3 within the last month. We have another state that I think will pass it to make it 19. 2 or 3 others are queued up for this year. We'll get into the 20s. We need to get to 34. But this would be, probably the biggest political explosion, if you will, because it would wake up Washington that now the states are going to take their constitutional authority and propose amendments to limit the power of the federal government. I mean, this will blow this city sky high if members of the state legislatures actually follow through with what the founders intended, which is they wanted a federal republic. They didn't want all the power concentrated in Washington. They didn't want Washington being able to go out there and say, Everybody is going to live by the rules we promulgate. They understood that states would be different. We would allow for diversity. You know, the left talks about diversity all the time, except they don't want diversity of thought and how people live their lives. They want conformity. They want people to obey them on how they live their lives. This is the opportunity for conservatives who are angry with Washington, feel frustrated and hopeless, plug into the convention of the states. This is an opportunity to really change things in America.
The federal government is too big and it spends too much of our money. And the Convention of States, it's time, it's long overdue. Senator Rick Santorum, always appreciate the visit, sir. We'll talk again soon.
In the 2 years of this emergency, the federal government has greatly expanded the scope of its activities, powers, and spending. And now the pushback. It's taking many forms, and one of them is a growing momentum around the idea of holding a convention of states to amend the Constitution to curb federal powers. Wisconsin and Nebraska are the latest two states to officially join the call for a convention, bringing the total now up to 17. That's the halfway mark to the 34 states that are needed to hold the convention. It's a bit of a radical idea in that it's never happened before, but Article 5 of the Constitution does allow for it. We have with us today Mark Meckler, the main driving force behind this movement. He is the president and co-founder of the Convention of States Action. Mark, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I think we had better start with you giving us Convention of States 101.
Sure. I think this is important. A lot of people don't know about this because it's a little used, in fact, never used portion of the Constitution. Article 5 gives us the methods by which we can propose amendments. We have 27 amendments to the Constitution. All of them have been proposed by the first method in the first clause of Article 5. That's when 2/3 of Congress proposes something, goes out to the states for ratification by 3/4 of the states. What we're doing is using the second clause of Article 5, when 2/3 of the states, today that would be 34 states, call for a convention for the same purposes. The states then convene. They discuss potential amendments. If they can get 38 states to agree, those amendments become suggestions to the states, and they go out for the same sort of ratification. It takes 38 states, 3/4 of states, to ratify anything that might be proposed out of convention. And today what's being proposed is what's called a subject matter convention. There are 3 subject matter areas. The convention will discuss anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, like a balanced budget amendment, anything that would impose term limits on federal officials, and that would include, by the way, staffers, bureaucrats, and the judiciary, and anything that would include scope and jurisdiction restraints on the federal government. That would be things like telling them, no, you can't be involved in healthcare or the environment or education, things that were never intended for the federal government.
Right now, there are 17 states who have signed on, and you need 34 for the convention to be convened. We'll just put up the map here of the states you have on board so far, those that have passed resolutions in at least one of their houses and those that are discussing it. How do you expect to get to 34? What's the math here?
Yeah, I think just to give you a couple of quick points coming up here shortly, we passed out of a South Carolina Senate committee this week, and we've already passed out of the House. So we're on our way to passage in South Carolina. West Virginia, we're moving right now. We expect movement there and probably passage in the next couple of weeks. We've already passed the Senate there several times. We look good in the House this year. Ohio looks good. Pennsylvania looks good. Iowa looks good. Kansas looks good. So there's a lot of movement happening this year. The path to 34, another 17 states, is primarily lined with states that have both houses of the legislature controlled by Republicans. Today, that's 31 states have both houses controlled by Republicans. If you count Virginia, they have one house controlled by Republicans now. That will likely flip in 2023. I think that takes you to 32 states. Minnesota has one house controlled by Republicans. I think that will flip in the next election. That would take you to 33. And I think there are a couple of other states that are becoming battleground states for the state legislature. I would say Nevada is probably top of the list there. So I think we could see 34 states with both houses controlled by Republicans no later than 2024.
If I read Article 5 correctly, and I may not have, it looks like Congress has to actually convene the convention. Is that right?
Congress has what are called ministerial duties. That's a legal term of art, sometimes called secretarial duties, meaning they must execute those duties. And so what it says is Congress shall call a convention, and the shall is triggered by 34 states requesting that convention. So they have a constitutional obligation to do so. If they were to choose not to do so, I doubt that happens, but if they were to choose not to do so, the states retain sovereign authority to meet any time they want. If you look at the history of Article 5 and the second clause, it was put in specifically to allow the states to wire around Congress and around the federal government more generally. And this is because Colonel George Mason asked the question, does any tyranny ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? The answer is no. So they wanted to cut the federal government out of the process. So the federal government actually has absolutely no role to play in convention outside of counting the applications and making the call. Each state can send as many delegates as they like. They can send one, they can send 100, but each state will have one vote. This is a convention of states, not a convention of delegates, not a convention of populations. So each state gets a single vote. So I do imagine that states like New York and California will try to sabotage the process, potentially try to propose amendments that are outside the scope of convention, as I described earlier. They will be overruled by states that are Republican dominated because, like I said, they're currently 31. There'll be probably 34 states dominated by Republicans. There'll be a supermajority there. And so there's really not much that these states, large or not, can do to derail the convention once it convenes.
Okay, and there's also the criticism or the argument that, the federal government already ignores provisions in the Constitution, has overstepped, the bounds of its powers a lot, especially in the last year. So what's to say that a new amendment to the Constitution will change that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best arguments I've heard, or one of the best questions. It was the question that I had when I first looked at this. As a conservative, I always think, well, the federal government doesn't follow the Constitution anyway. The reality is, if you really look into it, there's an underlying question: is which Constitution are we referring to? Are we referring to the one that's under glass at the National Archives, or are we referring to the one that they currently operate under, which is the one as interpreted by the Supreme Court? And the reality is they operate under the Supreme Court's Constitution, what I would call the Courtstitution. You can actually buy that Constitution from the federal government. It's over 3,000 pages long. It contains every case ever issued by the Supreme Court. It weighs over 10 pounds. That's the one they operate according to. And that's what we're trying to get at, is to get rid of a bunch of that stuff and go back to the original Constitution. So they largely do follow the Constitution. It's just not the one that you or I think of.
And is it possible, once at the convention, that the delegates could decide to entertain other agenda items, other potential amendments?
The delegates are actually limited by the resolutions passed by the states. Those resolutions are virtually identical, as I've described: 3 subject matter areas: fiscal restraints, term limits, and restraints on the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. Anything proposed outside of that, and that's not to say people wouldn't try, California would certainly try, anything outside of that is non-germane to the convention and could be gavelled out by the leadership as a non-germane proposal. If we were to assume even that somehow passed 34 more conservative or Republican states, it would still be a non-germane issue. It would essentially be null and void because the convention would have exceeded its authority. The delegates would have exceeded their authority. And in the end, it takes 38 states to ratify anything that comes out of convention anyway. So you'd have to get to 38 for anything that they could even get out of convention.
One of the provisions that you want to get an amendment on is limiting government spending, balancing budget. Could Congress retaliate and say, all right, we'll cut the budget. That'll be funding that goes to the states, which is, not an insignificant amount of money. Is there any way to mitigate that scenario?
Yeah, I certainly think Congress has the power of the purse. They control spending at the federal level. And what I'm more worried about is Congress saying, look, you're going to force us to balance our budget, so we are going to put unfunded mandates on this, force you to run the same programs you've always run, only now we're going to make you pay for them. We're going to make you tax your citizens and pay for them. And I think we could and we should pass a provision making unfunded mandates from the federal government unconstitutional. I would also argue that any balanced budget amendment should include provisions limiting the way that the federal government can balance the budget. So these could include taxation caps, spending caps. It could require the block grant funding of the same amount of funding to the states that we've always had. This is not necessarily a proposal to cut funding. It's not necessarily a proposal for any particular mechanism. This is a proposal to require the federal government to get their fiscal house in order.
All right, so we're out of time. I just want to give you a chance. Is there anything else we're missing about this? And when do you hope that there might be this convention called?
Yeah, the main thing that I wanted to say is that this is not a partisan effort. I did talk about Republican legislatures, but the reality is this returns the power to all states, blue states, red states, and everything in between. This is a citizens movement against the ruling elite in Washington, D.C. We have to take the power back from D.C. because they're never going to give it back to us. My hope on the inside is to get this done in 2024. On the outside, I'm shooting for 2026.
And do you have any conversations going on with Democrats that are interested in this?
We absolutely do. In fact, last week we had a Massachusetts committee pass this out of committee. That committee was 14 Democrats and 3 Republicans. They passed it out. Yesterday we had a great hearing in Maryland. So there are Democrats that are coming on board. We had Democrats vote for this in Kansas. It came out of a Kansas House committee. So definitely this is a movement that's growing, I think, on both sides of the aisle.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark Meckler.
And we are Convention of States, and our leader, Mark Meckler, is with us. Convention of States, another victory, Mark Meckler. While everybody else is focused on other things, you're focused solely on saving our republic and our Constitution. Tell us what happened.
Mark, it was a great day in West Virginia. A lot of years coming, a lot of hard fighting by the grassroots. So we came out of the House with an overwhelming victory on the House floor today. I believe it was 77 votes. It was a bipartisan vote, by the way. A bunch of Democrats voted for us as well. So really incredible victory. Amazing in the House Senate, straight to the Senate. And within 1 hour, we were being heard on the Senate floor. The Senate waived committee, brought it straight to the floor. A very unorthodox way of getting it done. Show their real support. They did a voice vote. There wasn't even a count. It was overwhelming. And that makes West Virginia state number 18 for the Convention of States.
This is fantastic, and maybe South Dakota can learn from this. Maybe the clowns in the state Senate there can learn from this.
Yeah, we hope so. And, you know, there's a lot more coming. There's a lot of positive stuff on the horizon. South Carolina has already passed the House, and we expect to be moving in the Senate here in the next week or so. So I think that's looking really good to be number 19. Iowa still looks good. Ohio, Pennsylvania. I think we have a lot more happening this year, Mark.
And so I predicted when we hit 20, the enemy will show its teeth. It'll become a national story, and you will become the leading Klansman of the American right by the time this thing is over. I believe that's what's going to happen in our white-dominated society. Now, this is a very, very serious effort to try and get our Constitution back. We do not believe Washington, D.C. should be amending the Constitution every time they get together. And so we want to put strict or restrictions in place that actually protect the Constitution, and we want to use the Constitution to protect the Constitution. You are promoting not just an idea, you're promoting a process that was written and endorsed by the delegates at the Constitutional Convention, correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Mark. You know, I think a lot of people have a misimpression about this, and they think, oh, these guys are trying to rewrite the Constitution, and they're putting the Constitution at risk. The reality is, over the last 150 years, the Supreme Court has largely rewritten the Constitution, mostly to the benefit of the Marxists and the people who would like to see power centralized in Washington, D.C. And so what we're trying to do is use the Constitution, Article 5 of the Constitution, to restore the Constitution, to go back to something like enumerated powers, to where the federal government had limited enumerated powers. They did the things that they had to do, that only they could do, and the rest was left to the people in the state. So this is really a power to the people sort of movement. We're going to take the power away from Washington, D.C., and we're going to give it back to regular folks in the states.
So the scare tactics and the fear-mongering will come, ladies and gentlemen. Ignore them. It's the same reprobates that have always attacked our system. They hate our constitutional republic, and then they pretend to defend it when they try to defeat these courageous movements. Convention of States, I really want you to try and embrace it, folks. If people want to get involved or understand more about it, where do they go?
Go to conventionofstates.com, fill out the petition. More importantly, click the Take Action tab and volunteer, because it's actually going to take real work to get this done, Mark. 5.2 million people involved already. We need the rest of your listeners on board.
And you're having a big convention in October, correct?
We are, Mark, October 6th through 9th in Orlando, Florida. It's open to people who are actually qualified leaders in convention of states. Incredibly, 400 sold out immediately, so we've opened it up to another couple hundred, be 600 people gathering in Orlando. These are fully trained, fully active volunteers who are leaders all over the country of this movement.
And did I agree already, I hope, to attend at some point there?
Yeah, I think we'll call this your agreement, if that works.
Yeah, it's so far ahead, but that's our goal, absolutely, to get there. We believe in this so strongly. And if people want to learn
Mark,
more about... Yeah.
Literally, there's nobody that we'd rather have there. If people haven't read Liberty Amendments already, this is the book that launched the movement. This is the intellectual foundation for the movement. If you want to know what Article 5 is about, what we're doing, you got to order Mark's book, Liberty Amendments.
By the way, you're very kind. Do these state reps and state senators, honestly, I'm just curious, do they ever read this book? Because this book was written in part to convince them.
A lot of them do, Mark. I can't overestimate the amount of people when I'm on the road, legislators, citizens, business people who say, I found out about this from Mark Levin, either from the book itself or from hearing you talk about it on the radio. So when I say you're the father of this movement, that's not just hyperbole. I mean, it's not just language I'm using. So many people I talked to heard about this from you. That's why you're such an integral part of this movement.
Well, and I want to thank you for the hard day-to-day labor on this, you and your really millions of members. You're the ones who hit the pavements. You're the ones who go into the state legislatures. Is there another state we should be watching right now?
Yeah, I think the next state up is South Carolina. Like I said, we've come out of the House already. We're pending in the Senate. I think it looks good. And I'm guessing that next week we'll see movement in the Senate.
All right, South Carolina. We'll be focused on South Carolina. Do we know where the senators stand or any of those people? Not that it matters. They have no role, actually. But
you mean the United States senators?
Yeah.
Yeah, most of them, Mark, we don't even ask. And because of what you said, they don't really have a role in this. So we kind of avoid most of the senators.
Yeah, most of them won't help us anyway. They'll come out against us. All right, Mark. Yeah, go ahead.
They love
exactly.
power in Washington, D.C. So
yeah,
we're going to take it away from them.
God bless you. My best to your wonderful family, and keep up the great work, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. God bless you, too.
And we want to thank the legislators in the great state of West Virginia for doing what they've done. And by the way, I've been to West Virginia many times. We have good friends in West Virginia. Despite all the cheap shots, it is a wonderful state with wonderful, wonderful people.
Giving power back to the states and the people is the mission of our next guest's organization, and they're using the Constitution to advance their cause. For the first time in our nation's history, 17 of the required 34 states have passed through their state legislatures Article 5 of the Constitution, calling for a convention of states that would rein in federal power, impose fiscal restraints on Congress, and limit the terms of office for federal officials. Convention of States Action President Mark Meckler joins us now with more. Mark, so great to see you. First of all, to our viewers, I am an enthusiastic supporter of this cause and this effort. I think it is an amazing opportunity to rein in the scope and power of the federal government. You hit a big benchmark this month, Mark. 2 additional states getting to 17. Talk to us about where this movement is.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it, Pete. Good to be with an old friend talking about this. We've been doing this for quite a while, and we just passed the 17 mark. It takes 34 states to call a convention of states. That convention intended to talk about potential constitutional amendments that could impose term limits, impose a balanced budget amendment, and restrict the things that the federal government's allowed to do, like getting them out of education, getting them out of health care, limiting the court to 9 Supreme Court justices so they can't pack the court. A lot of the things that the American people are worried about right now can be handled in a convention of states.
And Mark, this is all detailed in the Constitution. Article 5 of the Constitution empowered. And the idea was the framers thought, if ever the federal government gets so powerful and so draconian, of course we're going to give the states and the people recourse. And that's what this is.
Yeah, crazy idea. They knew that central governments get out of control. They understood tyranny, and they put a mechanism in. They said that they expected that the federal government would never restrain its own tyranny. At some point, it would come to the states to do that. We certainly live in those times now. The federal government is a tyranny, and at this point, 17 states have recognized that. We're well on our way to the 34 necessary to call a convention.
And for the most part, once a state legislature passes it, it stays on the books. And so ultimately, with some exceptions, but ultimately you can add states in the years to come. Real quick, how does the left feel about this, Mark?
Well, pretty much every leftist group in America has signed a press release against it. It was led by Common Cause and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Both Soros groups, Code Pink, La Raza, Planned Parenthood, MoveOn.org, Daily Cause, all of them in unified opposition against Convention of States.
You shall be known by your opposition, and in that sense, you're in a good spot. I'll tell you, it takes a lot of work to lobby state legislatures, state legislative committees, and others to get this passed. You've done it so far, starting in, I believe, 2014 in 17 states. As you pass more, there will be even more scrutiny, but I want to congratulate you on what you've done so far. And I do want to encourage our viewers, if you want to get involved in something that is a solution as big as the problem, conventionofstates.com. Mark, thanks for everything you're doing. Keep at it. What are the next? If there's 2 or 3 states you're looking at now, what are you looking at?
Yeah, right now, this week is South Dakota, followed by West Virginia and South Carolina. Those guys are going to line up really quick. We're going to be past 20 in the next few weeks.
Past 20 in the next few weeks. When you pass that, come back and give us an update, Mark. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Pete.
You got it. Thank you.
Convention of States. All right. Now, I got a lot of mail on this. I'm going to explain it to you. Again, this is why you need pen and paper. And then we're going to bring in a guy who's running a Convention of States, if it happens. Okay. So, philosophically, founding fathers, all that, a Convention of States allows the individual states to address the growing tyranny in Washington. All right? So we certainly have that. So Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution gives states the power to call a convention of states to propose new amendments to the Constitution. Article 5. All right? It takes 34 states to agree through their state legislatures and governor to participate in a convention of states. Currently, 17 states have agreed. They are Nebraska, Wisconsin, Mississippi, Georgia, Alaska, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, Indiana, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arizona, North Dakota, Texas, Missouri, Arkansas, Utah. Now, you don't see any blue states on that list. Okay? Wisconsin back and forth, but they're basically traditional states. Well, why would the blue states not participate in this? So they need 17 more states to get a convention. Okay? 8 others are considering it, and one house has approved it. So it's getting close, but it still needs more support. Now, what happens if they want to change things like term limits? All right, so we don't have term limits for federal elected officials. I like term limits. I bet you do. So let's get term limits. Well, you would have to get 38 states to ratify the amendment that there should be term limits and then say what they were. 38 states. If 38 states did that, all right, then it becomes part of the Constitution. You would go around Congress and the president. 38 states said, no, we want it. Okay, we're going to certify we want it. Then it becomes law, which is the power of a convention of states. Joining us now from Austin, Texas, Mark Meckler. He is the president of the Convention of States. Very impressive. All right, so did I describe that accurately? Did I leave anything out that's important?
No, you nailed it, Bill. That was perfect.
Okay. So now you are working to convince 17 more states to sign on. How's that going?
Yeah, it's going really well. In fact, I'll be leaving tonight for South Carolina. We'll be having a House hearing there. I expect that a Senate hearing. I expect we'll get that done. We've already passed in the House, so the Senate is next. From there, we'll go to West Virginia. We have supportive leadership in both houses in West Virginia. I expect we'll get that done in the next several weeks. North Carolina has already passed their House, pending in the Senate. I expect we'll get that done when they come back into session in May. Iowa looks very good this year, potentially Ohio and Pennsylvania as well. So we got a lot of states lining up for this session.
But it sounds to me like you're 2 years, maybe 3 years away.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate.
All right. So maybe coinciding with the next presidential election, you would have a convention of states. But California is never going to show up. New York won't show up. Illinois won't show up. Massachusetts certainly will not. Some of the New England states, like New Hampshire, I think might. Maine. But the states that don't show up, say you get your 34, all right, that means 16 states are sitting it out. Not going to hurt you.
Well, I just want to correct something. I think you are correct that a lot of those states will not pass resolutions calling for a convention of states. But when the convention convenes, it's what's called a general convention. And I expect all of those states will show up, if nothing else, to try and throw sand into the gear. So I expect they'll all show up. Also would like to point out that in Massachusetts this last week, that resolution passed out of an overwhelmingly Democrat committee, a committee that was 14-3 Democrat to Republican. We got the votes, it passed out of committee, and it's now going to the floor. So I think we're going to start seeing some movement on the left towards this as well.
That'd be interesting. All right, because you do need 38 states to pass whatever you propose for it to become part of the Constitution. Give me the top 3 things that a convention of states would want to get into the Constitution.
Sure. So there are 3 subject matter areas here. One is fiscal restraints on the federal government. So that would include the most popular, a balanced budget amendment supported by about 85% of the American public polled the last 30 years. That could also include tax limitations and spending caps. Number 2 would be imposing term limits on federal officials. And it's important we use the term officials. It's not just Congress. That would also potentially apply to bureaucrats and staffers, what you and I now know as the deep state. And then finally would be what we call scope and jurisdiction restrictions on the federal government. And that would involve going back to something more like the enumerated powers, telling the federal government, no, you cannot be involved in education, you cannot be involved in healthcare. This is really the restraining element of the convention. And I would add just kind of a tasty tidbit for the end. We can restrain the federal government and tell them that they cannot add more seats to the United States Supreme Court.
Don't eat avocado toast in 2022 before watching.
There are legitimate fears about this process, which I addressed in this conversation. We've had these conversations for how many years about this as a process on this show. But really, it comes down to one fear. See, what an Article 5 Convention of States ultimately shows is whether we are fake news or not. People email, so what's the plan if we have you? You are the plan. Folks, they didn't have a constitution drawn up before they got to the convention. They didn't even know what they were going to do. They tried other things, Articles of Confederation and other such things that were miserable failures. You're the plan. I'm the plan. People that know what is right and wrong and will act accordingly. That is the plan. The plan starts with that. And then, see, plans don't make people understand what is right and wrong and do accordingly. People knowing what is right and wrong and doing accordingly is what determines the plan. We're the plan. We are it. I had a woman, and God bless her, Barbara, just sent me a note about Phyllis Schlafly's concerns about this. And the article, the late great Phyllis Schlafly's concerns about an Article 5 convention. And she gives me a link from April of 1995. Phyllis, by the way, I knew well. I knew Phyllis well. I'd been on her show several times. She'd been on this show before you guys came to work here several times. She was an early promoter of my work. I loved her. I loved her to death. when they did that hatchet job on Hulu over her a couple of years ago. We had her daughter on the show, as I recall, to defend her legacy. But Phyllis died on September 5th, 2016. On September 5th, 2016, and man, that's not that long ago, is it?
No.
Would you have conceived of a time that your children would be told that unless they choked themselves out, they could not go to a school? And that's if we, on September 5th, 2016, did you think that the conservatives would be the ones fighting to reopen the government schools? I didn't. I didn't. I mean, doesn't that, and whether Colin Kaepernick, let alone what she thought in 1995. In 2016, I was hesitant about this. You know why I was hesitant about this? Because I was hesitant about us. That we wouldn't allow ourselves to get outflanked. That it would, you know how it would become a runaway event? If we permit it to.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. The Convention of States as a process calls the question. Who are we really?
What are you prepared to do?
That's right. What are we prepared to do? Yes. But now we're at a juncture here where we have no alternative. One of the positive lessons Dave taught me in between beatings is why there was so much bravery at the Alamo. Because there wasn't a back door. A lot of times we fail in life when we go into a situation contemplating what happens if we fail. You guys have worked very closely with me now for what? Going on 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
How often do I have conversations framed around what if we lose? What if it doesn't work? What if we fail? It's extremely rare.
Oh, and I don't ever recall having a conversation when that was the main premise. When he comes up, it's a secondary premise to whatever we're talking about.
My great fear is, what if I missed a big win?
Yeah.
That's my fear. You want to know why I lost 100 pounds and then the previous times I tried it, I didn't? Because I went in there thinking that failure was an option. The one time that I didn't, the one time I went in there thinking, you know what? I'm just blanking sick of living like this. Failure's not an option. That's it. Do or do not. There is no try. Get her done. Amazingly, that's the one time I lost 100 pounds. Was doing it that way. See where I'm going with this?
Mm-hmm.
Failure is not an option. We have been infiltrated on every side. Are you guys watching the antics of the Loudoun County School Board in Virginia? They're just carrying on with exactly what they got spanked for last year that probably won Glenn Youngkin the governor's office. We don't have a generation or two to undo this damage and systematically do our own return march through the institutions to drive people out. We do not. If you think we do, then you and I just have completely different reads on the moment we're in. Because we're in the end game. That's my read. Now, I could be wrong about that. I'd like to be, by the way. But I'm pretty confident I'm not. We are not a silent majority any longer. We're a completely outflanked plurality at best. We need a D-Day. We need a moment where we can reverse one mass cultural war version of an invasion to turn the tide. That's what we need. We cannot win this. We're too outflanked. We cannot do this piecemeal for 20 or 30 years. We're toast. We need one major offensive that would turn the tide. So to me, we have two options. The only option within the constitutional system I see is this one. It's the only radical option I see that provides the potential for that moment. We're not voting our way out of this, and we're not going to piecemeal our way out of this.
Well, hello there. This is Rita Peters back with you. If you are just joining our live stream, we are still waiting on the South Carolina Senate to take up our Convention of States resolution. That's H3205 in South Carolina for third and final reading. So again, this will be the final vote in the South Carolina Senate on the Convention of States resolution. Just a reminder, after the South Carolina Senate votes, assuming we have a positive vote today, we will still need to go back to the House one last time to get the House to concur in some amendments that were made to the bill on the Senate side. And those amendments actually are great because they removed a sunset provision that would have had the resolution expire after a number of years. So we would remove that and just some other edits to make the language really conform to the resolution as it was passed in the other states that have already passed it. So the amendment from the Senate side is a good thing, assuming we pass in the Senate today on third and final reading. We will go back to the House for concurrence. We do expect that that will happen. Very hopeful about that. But we're still just waiting for our resolution to come up. So it has taken a little bit longer than we expected today, but it could be up at any time. So for now, we will just go back to the live stream of the South Carolina Senate, and let's be praying for a favorable outcome there today.
And reduced down to 9, and we're going to try to reduce it down to 6. So this move here, fully implementing this, taking it all the way down to 6, I think is a tremendous idea, because it really does get to what Senator from Charleston was talking about earlier about the South Carolina homegrown, right? These are the South Carolina-based manufacturers who have been stuck with the higher tax rate, who are going to get some relief out of this. I think that's a very good thing. I'm glad we're doing that. Overall, look, you're taking $1 billion out on a recurring basis and $1 billion on a non-recurring basis. I like that because I think South Carolina has earned it, but also I like it, candidly, because Senator Peeler, what you're doing, you're reducing the rate of growth of government. I think that's a great thing. I'm glad that we are finally taking that step. I do not think that would have happened before. And I think that's a good thing for South Carolina as a whole. I'm glad that you're taking the rebate step. That also is a big move. Now, but I got to tell you, even though I am really pleased with where we are, I do have a little bit of disappointment. And the disappointment is because of so much of what I've heard.
All right, this Constitution has been amended 27 times, each time through Congress. But Article 5 in the Constitution allows for a second way, a convention of states. And 2 more states have joined the growing movement to invoke a convention of states to amend the Constitution. Nebraska and Wisconsin are now the 16th and 17th states. And according to Article 5, it takes 34 states to call the convention. And 19 more states are teed up to vote on whether to do the same this year. So how would it work? Joining us now is the man behind the movement, President of Convention of States Action, Mark Meckler. Mark, thanks for joining us for this. Break this down. What's going to happen, and how would this work?
Basically, Article 5 says that the states can gather in convention when 2/3 of them ask for it. And in this case, what the states are asking for is a convention to discuss fiscal restraints on the federal government. That would include a balanced budget amendment, things like that, tax and spending caps, term limits for federal officials, so not just Congress, but also in the deep state, the staffers, the bureaucrats, and even the federal judiciary. And then importantly, the third thing is any scope or jurisdiction limits on the federal government. And that means things like telling them they can't be involved in education or energy or the environment or healthcare, things they were never intended to be involved in. But once 2/3 of states call for convention, the states will gather in convention. They'll debate amendments, proposed amendments around those ideas. And if half of the states, or 26, the majority of states agree, then those proposed amendments go out to the states for ratification.
Let me ask you this. You've been working on this project since 2013. Why has it never been used before?
Yeah, I would say because it's hard. I mean, it's really hard. And that's how the founders intended it to be. It's the highest bar in the American system of governance. To have to get 2/3 of states to agree just to have a conversation, 3/4 of states to ratify. The founders intended it for it to take many years and involve millions of people so that we knew we actually had a broad consensus across the American public. They didn't want fads in popular opinion causing a convention of states and causing us to amend the Constitution. So it's long, slow work, over 5 million people involved in the movement nationally today. Like you said, we've just passed the halfway mark, and a lot of states are queued up to go here pretty quickly.
So 2 questions. How long can it go on? Is there like an end point? And B, let's say you hit the number. When does it have to happen and where does it happen? So that's 3 questions.
Yeah, so there is no end point. These resolutions, they're out there as long as they're out there until a state withdraws the resolution. And so it could take years. I'm hoping to get that done by 2024, maybe 2026 at the outside. And then once they actually convene in convention, they're going to get together. They'll set their own time limits. But where it takes place, Congress names the time and place. And so likely they'll call it for Washington, D.C., because they're D.C. creatures. But I expect that once they meet, the delegates themselves, one vote, one state, but as many delegates as they want from every state, will move it back to somewhere in the center of the country. That's what I'm hearing from all the state legislators.
All right, let's say you do get all 34. You talk about proposing these amendments. Do you have a strategy in place? What does that look like? What are you trying to amend?
Yeah, we do actually, and the 3 subject matter areas are important. Like I said, fiscal restraints, term limits, and limiting the scope and jurisdiction. But it involves things like a balanced budget amendment. 85% of Americans say the federal government should get their fiscal house in order. They'll never do it on their own. You could impose generally accepted accounting principles. They have no principles in D.C. You could impose tax and spending caps. You could tell them, no, you can't have a Department of Education or energy or environment, things that were always intended to be handled by the states. And importantly, you could limit the terms not just of Congress. I think this is really important. Staffers and bureaucrats who we now know are the deep state that serve 30, 40 years there and really control things. So those are the kind of amendments that would be proposed at a convention.
Real quick, can you add to this list? So, for example, I had somebody go to my website when I told them we were going to have you on, and they said, could you add voter ID?
Yeah, look, we could theoretically add voter ID, but we wouldn't want to specifically because, remember, this is intended to limit the power of the federal government. That would be an imposition by the federal government. We don't want the federal government controlling elections. We want the states controlling elections.
I don't want to control elections. I just want voter ID.
We do too. We're fighting for that,
Mark,
by the way.
this is so fascinating. I learned, I love this. Both Lindsay and I came to work today and we're like, were you reading Article 5 today? So this is awesome. You educated us, and I hope the viewers found it fascinating as well.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you guys.
You bet. Thank you so much. All right, coming up, the House Competes bill is
Yes, a lot of discussion going on about the U.S. Constitution and the potential for states to propose changes. So here's what lawmakers are thinking. What if states could propose changes to the U.S. Constitution? That's the goal of the Convention of States, for there to be a convention. 34 states must apply. As News 19's Julia Kaufman reports, many state lawmakers want South Carolina to be the next to join.
17 states have passed legislation to join the Convention of States. The goal is to get enough states on board so they can propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution that would limit the federal government.
People are looking at Washington, D.C., and they're pretty clear that it's out of control.
Mark Meckler leads the national effort for the Convention of States. He and members of the public packed into a Senate subcommittee meeting Wednesday to talk about South Carolina joining the group.
They gave you the power to call a convention, propose amendments, and actually ratify those amendments, thereby reforming the structure of the United States government.
Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution says if 34 states apply for a convention, then Congress must call for one.
This is a bad time to be tampering with the Constitution when we're in turmoil.
Chaplain Ray Moore worries a convention of states could turn into a dangerous, slippery slope.
We don't know what will come out on the other side. We're just very apprehensive.
Supporters of the convention say the goal is to propose amendments that will set term limits for federal officials, create a balanced budget, and cap spending and taxation. But those opposed, like Moore, say it could become a free-for-all.
The convention can do whatever they want, including proposing a new constitution. Now, I'm not necessarily expecting that, but the danger is there.
While opponents are concerned Americans' rights could be at stake, supporters say passing amendments to the Constitution is extremely difficult and would take 38 states to get it done. Legislation for South Carolina to join the convention passed the House last year and is now in early stages of the Senate. At the State House, Julia Kaufman, News 19, WLTX.
All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. Amanda's on a quick assignment. She'll be back in the next block, but I'm glad to join my next guest, a man who 8.5 years ago began an effort to create a convention of the states in America. And this week, we are now at the halfway point. 17 of the necessary 34 states have now voted to have a convention of the states. The man behind that incredible mission, Mark Meckler, is joining us now. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, John.
What a week it has been for you in the movement. Tell us what it's like to see these last two states, Wisconsin and Nebraska, coming in, and many more on the horizon, correct?
Yeah, it's been an incredible week to see Wisconsin first come in on Tuesday. Incredible victory for those activists out there. I'm so proud of all of them and the legislators who led the way, really great champions. And then on to South Dakota, where we passed out of the committee, blew through the House floor, and this week we're working in the Senate. And then, of course, we finished the week with Nebraska. That's been a long, hard fight in Nebraska. We had an incredible champion in Senator Halloran. Great grassroots out there. So that takes us to 17, the halfway point, and there is a lot more in the dock right now.
Yeah, it is remarkable. I want to ask you, for those viewers who may not be familiar with this movement, this self-governance movement, this return to federalism and states' rights, describe what's at the heart of the Convention of the States and what you guys hope to achieve when the 34 states finally vote.
Yeah, really at the heart of this is the idea that the American citizen is sovereign in our system of governance, and we believe that we, the people, should be in charge, not some bureaucratic elite thousands of miles away from our states and our communities. And we have in our Constitution a way to restore that balance. Article 5 of the Constitution gives us the way that we can amend, and we can propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. It takes 34 states to call a convention. Of course, we just passed the halfway mark. And when they do, they gather in convention. In our case, they're going to talk about things like term limits, forcing a balanced budget amendment, and taking the power away from the federal government to be involved in things like healthcare and education and energy, things that were always meant for the states. So really, this fight is about who decides in America, and we answer that with we the people.
Yeah, taking power from Washington, returning it to the people exactly the way our founding fathers intended. About a year ago, I was sitting around with one of our mutual friends, and it was right when the COVID thing was kind of going sideways, and people were just getting frustrated, pulling their hairs out, and they said, this is Mark Meckler's moment. How much has COVID and the failure of Washington and Fauci and Biden impacted Americans' willingness to say, you know what, we want to take this back?
Yeah, I think it's having a major impact. And what we're seeing is that people are watching what's going on in Washington, D.C. They're seeing large scale incompetence at every level of government. And they're saying we can do a better job at home. And we're tired of Washington, D.C. intruding on our lives. We have about 1,000 people a day join the organization on average. When Joe Biden gave his vaccine mandate speech, over 20,000 people joined the organization that day. So that gives you a very measurable look at what happens when the federal government is out of control and how it affects people's willingness to take back control for themselves.
Yeah. One of the things I love you do, you've created this poll that comes out a few times a month, and it really measures the disconnect. There's real America, middle America, that knows what they want, and then there's these guys and gals in Washington who are totally disconnected from it. How do we close that divide in the long term? How do we get Washington to be more responsive again and realize they ought to be listening to the people that sent them there?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I don't think Washington is going to be very responsive. And this is why I think it's important to take the power away from D.C. The founders always expected that Washington would be a problem, that a central government would be a problem. And so they designed this system of federalism. I know you're a big fan of federalism. And that system was designed so that the vast majority of things that we do as a government together as people are to be done in the states and in local jurisdictions, not in Washington, D.C. And we've largely broken that system of federalism. We put too much power in Washington, D.C. The courts mostly are responsible for that. And so I think we need to reverse that and take the power away from D.C. So it's less about making D.C. responsive and more about making D.C. less powerful in our lives.
Yeah, that really is the lesson that I think we've learned from this period of time. When you started this, I first met you when you were with the Tea Party Patriots. You built a tremendous organization. Then you moved on to this. There were a lot of country club Republicans, a lot of Republicans that kind of enjoyed big government, homeland security. Today, the party is in the hands of a whole new generation. You got Ron DeSantis and you've got Ken Paxton in Texas. You got these folks that are really exercising their rights and tugging that power back. How important is to have those major players now on the national stage?
I think it's incredibly important, and I think there are a new and younger generation of politicians that have a different perspective on what states are supposed to be and what they should be doing vis-a-vis the federal government. You mentioned Ken Paxton. He's a personal friend. I think he's the best AG in the United States of America. And you have country club Republicans trying to take him out, of course. I think somebody you didn't mention is Kim Reynolds. Governor Reynolds in Iowa has done an incredible job. Yeah. There are other governors around the country. Ron DeSantis, of course, I would call him America's governor at this point. I think there's an entire generation rising, and I think you're going to see a lot of them rise out of these school board fights around the country, younger people in their late 20s, early 30s that are just entering the political fray, and I think they're going to alter the landscape for a long time to come.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And I've covered politics since the early 80s. I haven't seen this level of energy at the grassroots at any point in the last 2 decades. This is really a remarkable moment. It's sort of when Tea Party, Trumpism, and now this moment. We got about a couple minutes left. Tell me what we should be looking for next. You mentioned Iowa. I think Iowa is one of those states where we might see the convention go next, right?
Yeah, I think actually probably next is going to be West Virginia, if I had to bet, or South Dakota. South Dakota's already through the House and we're into the Senate. So that could happen as early as next week. On Monday, I'll be testifying in the West Virginia House. That should move pretty quickly. We've passed the Senate there before. If we get out of the House, and I'm assured we will, the Speaker's on board as a co-sponsor, that could pass next week. So we could actually get 2 more states next week. Close behind, I would say, is possibly Pennsylvania, Iowa, Kansas. We have a hearing next Wednesday. There's so much stuff happening around the country. I'm having a hard time keeping track of it, honestly.
Well, once you got momentum, that's a good thing. We got about a minute left. You've got a slogan, 22 in 22. Describe what that goal is and how you think you're going to hit it.
Yeah, so right now we're at 17 states. And so, of course, that means we would need 5 more states to pick it off. I think we have 3 immediately in the dock here. And so I think there's a whole bunch of other options out there. I think getting to 22 we're going to do this year. So that's 22 and 22. The main way we're going to make it happen, it's not me. This movement's all about the American people. There are over 5 million people involved. It happen if your viewers get involved, if your listeners get involved. They can do that by going to conventionofstates.com, sign the petition, even if it's already passed in your state, let your legislature know that you support it, and then click the Take Action tab and volunteer, because it's not enough to complain. It's not enough to sign a petition. You need to be in the fight.
Absolutely. And you have built an army of more than 5 million Americans all pushing in the same direction. Mark, congratulations on the success this week. Can't wait to get you back on the show.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
All right.
in my view, it's one of the most important pieces of legislation you'll ever entertain, because we are at a crisis point in this country. We didn't get here just in the last few years. We got here over the last many decades. Washington is bloated, out of control, and we have the right and the ability, thanks to the Constitution and our founders in Article 5, to put a stop to it. It's the legal and lawful way to go about all of this. So, and no lecture on federalism, but we state legislators and state legislatures are supposed to be the ones that are most powerful. We gave birth to the federal government. We are the parent, they are the child. And it's gotten turned around and upside down, and they're out of control, and they don't seem to want to control themselves. This isn't a red and blue issue, as some people like to make it out to be. It's a red, white, and blue issue. This isn't about Republicans and Democrats. They're all guilty up there. They're all guilty of doing all of these things to expand the federal government and encroach upon our liberty. One of the things you may hear, and about the only thing the opposition can come up with is, well, we don't want a con, as they like to call it, that's their made-up term. We don't like that because you're going to tear up the Second Amendment. You're going to do all of these things. Well, that's just all these nonsense. If you will, an amending convention of the states can only propose amendments to the Constitution. Propose it. We have a constitutional convention underway right now. It's called Congress. On an average session, they'll have 75 different proposed amendments. Well, none of them gets any real traction. But the math is on the side. So if a convention of states can only offer and propose amendments, once we have 34 states and Congress calls this, then it takes 38 states to ratify. We couldn't even ratify the ERA. So here's the math that I kind of like. If you have 38 states, that's 76 legislative bodies that have to agree. The House and the Senate, except for one, unicameral, but 76. That's a high jump bar. Heck, we can't even find agreement around this joint on a lot of things that are very important to us. So 76 legislative bodies in this nation have to come together and say they agree without amending anything. So I think that's the ultimate safety valve. In other words, 13 states have veto power over anything that would be proposed. And I don't foresee anything nutty coming out of a proposed amendments out of a convention like this. So I have no fears because the math is on our side. Again, I just look at us. We have a hard time agreeing on stuff right here. So let alone 76 different legislative bodies. I would hope that you would, I know you know a lot about this, carefully consider it and pass and move this forward. We did it in the House. It took 7 years to get this bill through the House of Representatives. Hopefully it won't take 7 years in your side, your body. We can do this rather rapidly. We will be the 18th state. 2 other states just recently in the last week or two have passed this. So we'll be the 18th state. We're more than halfway there to the 34.
Hey, Mark Meckler here, president of Citizens for Self-Governance and one of the founders of the Convention of States Project. And I'm glad to be here with you. It's really exciting to follow Dr. Tom Coburn, who told you all about his time in the legislature and why he thinks right now in American history we need a Convention of States so badly, and why this is really the only solution as big as the problem. You also had the opportunity to hear from somebody I greatly admire, Rita Dunaway. She's our national legislative strategist. She's literally a genius on this subject. She told you how the convention process works, exactly what you can expect, so that you understand how the whole thing will unfold. And my job here today is to present a vision to you of what potentially America looks like after we hold a convention. I want you to think about what a convention is going to look like when it actually takes place. It is literally, no exaggeration, going to be the most extraordinary event in all of American political history. Think of the Super Bowl and the World Series and the World Cup and the Kentucky Derby all rolled into one. Think of a presidential election layered on top of it, and think of everybody in the country paying attention. It is going to be an extraordinary and a long-term media event. I figure a convention is going to take anywhere from 90 to 120 days. That's the average length of a legislative session. There's going to be a lot of legislators there. I expect it's going to take that long to get this done. And people are going to be paying attention the whole time. It'll be broadcast on C-SPAN. All the major media outlets will be there. All the newspapers, all the bloggers will want to be there. I don't know about you, but I want to be there. It's going to be incredible. One of the most important byproducts of this whole thing, whatever comes out of convention, is the extraordinary education that will be provided to everybody in the nation. You know, I know if you're like me, and I know you are because you're watching this, you feel like people don't know enough about the Constitution. Not enough people pay attention to the structure of our government and know our history. So imagine the scope of this constitutional education project where everybody in the country is paying attention. And what are we debating? We're debating the proper scope, size, and jurisdiction of the federal government. We're debating the balance of power between the people and the government. We're debating the balance of power, the appropriate balance of power between the states and the federal government. This is the healthiest discussion we could possibly have in America today. And I'm really excited to think everybody's going to be involved in this. You know, school kids are going to be watching it. There'll be lesson plans written around it. And I mean little school kids all the way up through postgraduate students. College professors will have their classes watching it. It'll be broadcast on TV. It's going to be incredible. What comes out of it? We don't know for sure. No one can predict exactly what comes out of it. We know, and you've learned, it's going to follow the lines of the resolution set forth. There are going to be 3 subject matters discussed: imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government, imposing term limits on elected and appointed officials, and my favorite, putting scope and jurisdictional restraints on the federal government. Those are the things that are going to be talked about in this convention. What comes out of it in the end are amendments that fit within those application areas. So let's talk about some of the things that might come out of it. Now, I can't say exactly what will come out of it, but I'll give you an idea of some things that I think might come out of it. Imposing fiscal restraints on the federal government. What might come out of that is a balanced budget amendment. In other words, the government can't spend more than the government takes in. Now, I don't like that alone, but what if you were to add on top of it something that prevented them, a scope and jurisdictional restraint prevents them from raising revenue more than a certain percentage of gross domestic product, or limiting spending increases or tax increases to population plus inflation increases. So there's all kinds of structural restraints that might be put in place on the federal government. How about this one? I love this one: imposing generally accepted accounting principles on the federal government. You know, the federal government has an accounting system that's different than what everybody else uses. In fact, private citizens would go to jail if they tried to account to the IRS the way the federal government accounts to us. So we ought to impose all of these restrictions. Imagine what the federal government would look like with those restrictions in place. Imagine we wouldn't be running $1.3 trillion deficits. Today we're over, $22 trillion in long-term debt. Imagine if we could start to make that go away because our spending had to match our revenue, and our revenue and taxation were limited by formulas to keep it from going up. In other words, what it would force government to do is make the tough decisions. One of the things Tom Coburn talks about all the time is that the guys and gals in DC, they don't like to make the decisions, even the easy decisions, but they really hate to make the tough decisions. Which programs to cut, where to cut. It shouldn't be so hard. There's over $400 billion a year in waste and duplication that Senator Coburn has demonstrated. So they should cut those right away. But look, people in DC consider these things difficult. They have to be forced to do them. If they're forced by constitutional amendment, they'll do them. So I want you to think about how amazing it would be if our government was forced to balance its budget. And there are some countries that have started to do this. The economic growth that comes out of it is incredible. The economic freedom that comes out of it is incredible. So this is something we need to do. And I want you, as we're doing it, to think of the possibilities, to think about what the future could really look like for our kids and our grandkids if our government was forced to live within its means and not have the power to tax us to death in order to do so. These are things that are possible out of a convention.
Also, enforcing generally accepted accounting principles and transparency, we would actually know what's going on. Because today, to be honest with you, the General Accounting Office, the Congressional Budget Office, they all lie to us. And so we need to enforce these things, force these things on the federal government. I think the country would be way better off. Let's talk a little bit about term limits. So term limits, 80+% of the American people believe in term limits for Congress. We've got people who've been in Congress, maybe if you're a little bit younger, as long as you've been alive. It's incredible how long guys like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer have been in Congress. I would say it probably qualifies for close to forever. And we don't like the idea of career politicians. The founders didn't like the idea of career politicians. So imagine Congress limited to, say, maybe 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate. Now that sounds like a long time, I realize, for term limits. It's actually longer than the average congressman serves. But what if they were forced to move out? That would get rid of people like McConnell and Pelosi and Schumer, the real long-termers. And you could cut that in half. What if it was 2 or 3 terms for the House, maybe a maximum of 6 years? Maybe it was 2 terms in the Senate, right? A maximum of 12 years. That would give somebody maybe 18 years. It would be incredible to see this kind of rotation in office take place. The founders always intended rotation in office, and we don't have it now, and we need a way to impose that. I think it would be really refreshing to see a bunch of new faces, a bunch of new people in Congress regularly. For me, I'm really interested in rotation in office for judges, federal court judges, and Supreme Court justices. Right now, we're having huge fights over every Supreme Court justice nomination. Why? Well, part of the reason the Supreme Court's too powerful. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But also because anybody that gets appointed to the Supreme Court serves 20, 30, 35 years. It's incredible. They're not even considering people for spots on the Supreme Court that are 60. 60 is not old. There's a lot of wisdom that's had between 45 and 60, right? 15 years, the prime of your working life. If you're a judge, you're hearing all these cases. I'd like the court to be able to consider a 60 or 65-year-old jurist. Can't even consider them now, because what we need to do is put somebody on the court that can sit there for 30 or 35 years. What if we limited their terms to, say, 12 years? Think back to the founding of the country. The average life expectancy at the time was 54, and the average appointment age was 47. Now, some jurists, to be clear, served a lot longer than that. They lived a lot longer than average life expectancy, but it kind of gives you an idea of what the founders intended, and I don't think it was 30 years. And I think it would be pretty good if we weren't having such huge fights about the Supreme Court, and if we could get a little bit more rotation in office, get some maybe older, wiser people to come onto the court with a lot more experience. This is a possibility we could have with a convention of states. The same is true not just for the Supreme Court, but all these federal courts. Statistics show if you look at what federal court judges do over time they have a tendency to rule more and more in favor of the expansion of government power. After all, they work for the federal government. Their fellow employees on the federal bench are federal employees. The people who work for them are federal employees. There's a natural human tendency to default towards the federal government. It's not true for everybody, but it's true for a lot. What if we could remove those incentives by making it so that these appointments weren't lifetime appointments? I think it's a pretty compelling vision. I'd love to see what comes out of a debate at convention, and I'd love to see how the world unfolds afterwards. So I'm excited about the idea of term limits, maybe not just on Congress, but on federal court judges, the Supreme Court as well. And I think this is one that excites all of us. How about term limits on bureaucrats, right? We got a problem now. We have these administrative agencies running the country. I think it's a cancer on the country itself. I think it's unconstitutional. We'll talk a little bit about how to get rid of the agencies entirely. But what if we could say the bureaucrats were limited in terms to 12 or 15 years? Right? And so that's it. That's all they get. And then they have to go out and work in the private sector. So maybe they come in at the end of their private sector career. Maybe they go to the public sector in the beginning and then move out into the private sector. But having people entrenched in federal bureaucracies for their entire careers is not healthy. It's creating a ruling class. They're separated from the rest of us. They don't live under the rules that they impose on the rest of us. They rule us from afar in Washington, D.C. We need to take away the idea of lifetime employment for the federal government. Again, founders never intended it to be this way. So imagine what it would look like if you didn't have people that had been there forever. I think it would be a really healthy thing for the country. So these are some of the things we could do under the term limits part of our application. The country would be a lot better off. But I'll be honest with you, more important than either the fiscal restraints or the term limits restraints. The core, the heart of the Convention of States project is about limiting the scope and the power and the jurisdiction of the federal government. This is where we've gone wrong. This is the disease. The other things, people staying in office too long, us spending too much money, judges in office too long, these are symptoms. The reason people are doing this is because the federal government has become so big, so broad, so overreaching that it's enjoyable to be in Washington, D.C. forever. That there's so much power in Washington, D.C. There's so much prestige. There's so much money. That's the problem that we have in Washington, D.C. That's about scope, that's about power, and it's about jurisdiction. We need to limit those things in the federal government. And let me get really specific for you and paint the picture of a world potentially post-convention. This is a really big one for me, and it's probably the biggest. We have the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and that gives people the power to, or it gives the federal government the power to regulate interstate commerce. What's that mean? The question is, first, what did it mean in 1787? What it actually meant was it gave the federal government the power to regulate the shipment of goods across state lines. That's it. It was really narrow and enumerated power. There was a reason New York and New Jersey were about to come to blows in a trade war at the time. And so the federal government was given the power to moderate those things, to regulate. But regulate back then didn't mean regulate like write these thick books of regulations, like books like you see on the shelf behind me. What it actually meant was regularize or smooth out. So there's this narrow power given to the federal government to make sure there's no trade wars. That's what it was all about. In the 1930s, you get a case, Wickard v. Filburn, where the Supreme Court is looking at the idea that sanctions were imposed upon a farmer who grew wheat for his own consumption and for the consumption of his livestock. Okay, so I want you to think about that. He's growing wheat for himself, right? The federal government says, well, you're involved in interstate commerce, so we can punish you for growing too much wheat. He says, wait a minute, that's not interstate commerce. I'm not growing wheat and selling it and shipping it across state lines. And the federal government's argument was this absurd, ridiculous on its face argument that no, you're not, we get that, but because you're growing your own wheat, you're not buying wheat on the open market, so you are in fact affecting interstate commerce. Think about that. In other words, not doing business becomes doing business, not engaging in interstate commerce becomes engaging in interstate commerce. In other words, nothing equals something. This is a magic trick by which the Supreme Court said the federal government has jurisdiction to do pretty much anything. What this gave the federal government jurisdiction over are things that you and I know today that just seem like a given part of the government: the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Energy, the EPA, and many more run under the authority and the auspices of this broad Commerce Clause interpretation. This is an incredible expansion of federal government power. It's an amazing time in our history, a really bad time in our history. So think about that. I would argue, this is, I'm making up this number, but roughly 30 to 40% of the federal government operates under the authority of the Commerce Clause as interpreted by the Supreme Court. In a convention, I think we can, and we would, I would certainly suggest that we reinterpret the Commerce Clause, and we do it in a way that goes back to its original intent. In other words, the federal government has the authority to prevent trade wars that involve the shipment of goods, and because of modern society, it might be the shipment of information across state lines. We can limit it like that. It would be incredible. It would do away with the authority for the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, the places that the federal government shouldn't be involved at all. Now, I don't know about you guys. I get excited when I hear that. This jacks me up because I don't think we should have a Department of Education. Roughly $4 trillion spent since the 1970s with zero improvement in test scores. How cool would it be if that $4 trillion never got taken out of the states? It stayed home in your state for your folks, for your own Department of Education, for your local school districts, preferably to spend on your kids in the way that you see fit. That's how our system should work. What if we could do away with the EPA? Think of all the intrusion on property rights. The EPA now regulating every pond, puddle, and stream on every private person's property. You know, regulating our forests in a way, the national forest, parks and recreation, all these things intruding on our own personal property freedoms. A lot of this stuff could be made to go away, returned to the states where it belongs. This doesn't mean, by the way, that it would be anarchy or chaos. It just means that regulation, to the extent that it exists, would be at home in your state. It'd be different in every state. New Jersey, California, New York, Illinois, more liberal states would be different than Texas or Kansas or Oklahoma or Nebraska. That's how it was always intended to be. How cool is that, that our education system would be different in all these given states, that these states would be free to experiment, to do what Americans are so extraordinary at, which is to exercise our genius and our freedom and our ideas in our own states with our own people in our own way and see what works. It would be an incredible renaissance in America if we free the American people and free the American states to act independently of each other. The only exception would be, to me, is you have fundamental constitutional restraints placed by our Constitution itself, providing basic guarantees of freedom and rights, rights that are God-given in the first place, but the government is supposed to protect. That's what the Constitution was meant to do, not all this other stuff. So if I'm going to paint a vision, I think the vision looks like this. You take our Constitution from what it is today, which is this big, giant, bloated document with about 3,000 pages of Supreme Court decisions, and you cut it back down to something a lot closer to what the original Constitution looked like. Most of you carry one of those around, a pamphlet, in your breast pocket. And so this is what we can actually do with a convention. It's so much more than we can do with any other kind of politics in our country today. And I'm not telling you not to be engaged in elections. You should be. We have a basic civic obligation to be engaged in our elections, to put the best possible people we can, not only in Washington, D.C., but in our state houses. You can and you should be involved in those things. But we also need fundamental structural reform. That's what comes out of a convention of states. And in the end, what you get out of it is a country that looks a lot more structurally like the country that you know, that you've read about, that the founders intended. It means that you're more free. It means that your kids and your grandkids are more free. And that freedom, that leads to prosperity. They will be free and prosperous people. That's the gift that you and I and everybody else who is involved in Convention of States are working to give to our kids and grandkids. Freedom and prosperity. That's our history. That's our heritage. I think one of the most special things about our heritage as a country, and it's reflected in the Convention of States movement, is the idea of self-governance. It's a unique idea in America compared to the rest of the world. It's a unique idea in human history, really. The idea that we actually have the right to govern ourselves. Not only the right, we have the capacity to govern ourselves. I ask people all the time, do you think that Washington, D.C. should run your life, or do you think that you should run your life? Who decides? Everybody, left, right, center, they don't care. They say, I should decide. For my family, me, my community should decide. My church should decide. My school should decide. People believe in governing themselves, personally at home and in their local communities, and maybe for the bigger things in their states. Most people don't believe that governance should come from Washington, D.C. I want to add this too, because I think this is really important. We live in really polarized times, and I hate this. It really bothers me when I turn on TV and just listen to the rhetoric, and it comes from both sides, all the hate and the yelling and everybody dislikes each other. This is really bad for our country. And a big part of this comes from the way we are structurally governed today. This is what I mean by that. You know, when you have a Barack Obama presidency and you have a Democratic Congress, people like me, and maybe a lot of you watching, don't like what they do very much. We're frustrated, and we'll watch the policies they put in place and they make us angry. We'll listen to the things they do. Maybe the way if the Supreme Court is more liberal, we don't like the decisions they make, that they impose on us. 9 people in robes, it's usually one person in a robe making a decision. We're really frustrated. The flip side of that is you have a lot of people right now, they don't like Donald Trump. They don't like President Trump's administration. They don't like a Republican Congress. They're concerned about a Supreme Court becoming more conservative. So there are people in the country, close to 50% of the country, that don't like that stuff. And they're going to be frustrated with all the decisions. We see the hyperbole on television every night. They're going to be frustrated with everything coming out of Washington, D.C. And you know what? I may like the policy, some of it coming out of Washington, D.C., but I just don't want them making the decisions. So think about this vision. What if we remove a huge chunk of that power from Washington, D.C., so that whether it's the Obama administration or the Trump administration, they don't have near so much effect on us. We all wouldn't have to be so engaged in all this stuff going on Fox News and MSNBC every night and the fights between the talking heads and the fights between the parties. We could worry more about what's going on at home. That would be so cool. And it would bring the temperature down and it would bring the hatred down. You know, states are a lot more homogenous than the nation at large. There's individual cultures. Texas is very different than California. Texans are different than Californians, right? That's a generalization. I mean, certainly there are liberal people in Texas and conservative people in California, but there's a larger population base of conservatives in Texas and liberals in California. So California should be governed in a more liberal way. And Texas in a more conservative way, people would be a lot happier. There would be a lot less conflict. And I'm all for less conflict in the country. We have a lot more in common than we have different between us. We all love our families. We all want people to be prosperous and well-fed and employed and clothed and housed. We're all looking for those same things. We have different methodologies for achieving those things. And so when Washington imposes a one-size-fits-all fix, 50% of us are pissed off. We need to take that power away from them and give it back to the states. Think how awesome that would be. Think what it would be like if all the states could do what the people in the states believe. Think about how important this is. Can you talk to your congressman? How often do you talk to your congressman? How many times have you met with your congressman? You can try, and you might be able to get a meeting over time after asking for what's hard. They're really busy. To their defense, it's over 700,000 people per congressional district. Now, compare that to sitting down for a meeting with your local state rep. That's pretty easy. Usually you can do it without an appointment. You can, if you go to the Capitol, you can probably go by their office, find a time they'll be available, and sit down with them. That's a big deal. That's governance close to the people. That's what comes out of a convention of states. It's really empowering. If you haven't done it, come with us sometime to your state capitol. Sit down and talk to your state rep. You know, generally, relatively nice people. They're your neighbors. They live somewhere near you in your state. They probably shop at the same stores. They go to the same churches. Their kids have been involved in the same little league or soccer leagues. That's governance close to the people. That's what comes out of a convention of states. That was the vision of the founders for the United States of America. So you've seen the big picture here. You've heard from Senator Coburn why it's so important at this time in history to call a convention of states. His view from under the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C. He saw the swamp up close and personal in the House and the Senate, and he figured out no way to fix it there. You heard from Rita Dunaway. She explained to you how the whole process works. And I hope sitting here with me for 15, 20 minutes is giving you a vision for where we're headed after we have a convention of states. This is what's possible. We will conduct the greatest experiment, the greatest educational project in American political history. And in the end, what we're going to get is a country that's a lot better because it'll be freer and you'll be more in control of what happens. And your kids are going to be more prosperous and more free over the long term. I'm really excited about the project. Hopefully you catch a little bit of my enthusiasm. I really believe we're going to accomplish this. That's why I'm so engaged. That's why I've dedicated my life to it. And that's why I'm going to issue a challenge to you right now. I've dedicated my life to this. My wife, Patty, works with me full time. You know, my kids are in and out of being involved as well. My daughter is off at college, but she goes and speaks at events about Convention of States. My son's coming out of the Marine Corps. He's done a lot of stuff for Convention of States. And I know lots and lots of people and friends and family that are involved in the movement as well. Now it's your turn. You've seen this. You've gotten all this education. What are you going to do with all of this, right? I hope you're as excited as I am. And if you are, you're asking, so what can I do now? How do I get involved? And the answer is you can get involved. And there's all kinds of ways and all kinds of levels you can get involved. And every little bit helps. What you need to do is you need to go to the website and you need to sign up and get ready to volunteer. You need to watch some more courses. Get more educated. Learn more about your country. Learn more about Article 5. Learn about all these incredible changes that we can make. Maybe you volunteer to be a district captain, to organize people in a district in your state where you live, your neighbors, your friends, your coworkers. Maybe you decide you love it so much you want to step up into state leadership. Look, whatever you want to do, we're going to make room for you. This is one of the incredible things about Convention of States, right? If you want to step up and you want to lead, I'll tell you for sure, trust me, there's room for you to lead. We literally have kids that are helping lead. We have one kid in our organization now leading our national youth effort. He's one of our leaders. He started with us as a district captain when he was 12 and a half years old, right? So if a 12 and a half year old can do it, I think you can do it. I heard a story just this week, incredible story of a woman named Mary who got involved. She became a district captain. Mary's 86 years old. She's gone out to her entire apartment complex, got 80 people, 78 people to sign petitions. That wasn't enough for her. Her goal was 200, so she went to the grocery store, signed up everybody in line, and went around the shopping center getting people to sign petitions. She does training for us now, 86 years old. Mary says, if I can do it, anybody can do it. 12 and a half, 86. We got people younger than that, and we got people older than that. There's room, and there's a place for everybody. So I would challenge you, get educated, get involved, become part of saving your country. I know you're frustrated. I know you're disappointed with what's going on in Washington, D.C. Who isn't? So we can sit around, we can yell at the TV, we can complain to our neighbors. We all do this. Or we can do that plus getting involved. So it's time for you to get involved. And I'm going to give you one last big challenge, which is you can get involved by being an activist, which is really pledging to be, like the founder said, right? Lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So if you work, you've got your life in the movement, you've got your honor in the movement. We trust you to be honorable and kind and truthful and operate with integrity and ethics. And the last part is your fortune. I don't need your whole fortune now, right? Not a big ask. Here's what I would say you could do. We have this incredible program going on, which is called 5 for 5. $5 for Article 5, right? And what I would ask that you do is just get signed up like I did and give $5 a month for Article 5. If we get 1 million people to do 5 for 5, that's the budget I think we need to get us all the way to convention. 1 million people, $5 a month. Nobody has to do a lot, right? It's a lot of people doing a little. This is a grassroots movement, and in the end, that's what it's all about. This is what I want to close with. What it's really all about is you. And when I'm talking about grassroots, it's not just a concept. I'm talking about you as a person. That's what grassroots is. It's you as a person deciding to be involved in a movement. It's your neighbors, it's your friends, it's all of us working together to build what I would describe as the largest self-governing citizen grassroots army in history. That's what we're working to build. That's our real mission. We want to pass the resolution, we want to get to convention, we want to pass amendments, but we know what it's going to take is the mission, which is building this incredible grassroots army that America has never seen before. You have an extraordinary opportunity before you right now, and that is there's a spot with your name on it in that grassroots army. And that grassroots army is full of nothing but heroes. There's a spot with your name on it and a little plaque underneath it that says you're a hero. Ronald Reagan said, this is my favorite Reagan quote. He said, they say we live in a time when there are no heroes, but I say they just don't know where to look. That's what I say. They don't know where to look. I actually know where to look because I'm looking at one right now. And I travel around the country and I see them everywhere I go, and they're involved in this movement. So it's your turn. Step up, get involved in the grassroots, and be a hero. And I'm going to see you out there when I'm traveling around the country. Thanks for watching.
Never been so proud as I am of the proud of the Senate today. I appreciate your work, appreciate your vote, and I want to thank you again. I'm like a dog playing poker. When I get dealt a good hand, my tail starts wagging. And the whole time during that roll call, my tail was wagging. I almost missed the roll call. Thank you, each and every one of you. I heard everything was said today, and I'll leave it at this. We've only just begun to trim. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator from Cherokee. Thank you so much. That takes us to page. Yes, a senator from Orrery, Senator Rankin, cautiously asked for it.
Unanimous consent for the music offered by the senator from Gaffney not to be recorded in the journal.
Is there objection? Hearing none. Senator from Fairfield, Senator Fanning, by purpose you ask.
simply asking why when I sang I got no applause, and when the chairman sang he got a thunderous applause.
The Senate is well informed. It takes it to page 25 on our calendar, S 953 by the senator from Lawrence. The clerk will read.
It's a bill amending the code relating to designation of voting precincts in Lawrence County.
The senator from Lawrence, what purpose do you rise?
Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing me. I just want everybody to know, start off by telling you, everyone, that there is a book. There is a book. The Law of Article 5. It's written by Robert G. Nadelson. He's an expert scholar on Constitution and constitutional law. I am Pat Tondini. I live in Lexington, Yankees, and I'm glad to be one. I'm proud to be a retired educator. I taught for 23 years in South Carolina. I spent a few years at Dreher High School and spent 20 years at Midlands Technical College on the airport campus. I have experienced the misunderstanding and the uneducation of some of our young people when it comes to our history of the United States and especially the Constitution. It appears to me that they have rights and opportunities all mixed up. I proudly volunteer for the Convention of States because I feel it's my duty to educate fellow citizens about the following concerns. I have three boys, three young men. Okay, they were all educated and they grew up here most of their life here in South Carolina. They're all Citadel graduates. They're all good, strong, productive, effective to me at one time or another in the recent past. Mom, this isn't the world you prepared us for. And they're right. Okay. The federal debt, some of these numbers you've heard before, but you know what? They're the facts. I'm glad you're hearing them over and over and over again. The federal debt is over $23 trillion and it's growing every day. That equals over $180,000 per taxpayer. And this doesn't even include the federal unfunded programs which are funded. We have corporations and big businesses that seem to have purchased our government in Washington, D.C. We need term limits to stop these career politicians that do not promote the people's agenda. We need to stop the federal overreach. One issue that's dear to my heart, you already know probably, and has a powerful example in South Carolina is the state education. The Department of Education didn't even exist until 1980. They tell South Carolina that you have to use Common Core. Not that it's good or bad, but they shouldn't be telling us how to educate our citizens. That's not their job. I worry about this land of opportunity and what it'll look like, not only for my children, but your children, grandchildren. I have 3 sons, I have 7 grandchildren. I'm an ex-military wife of 24 years. Came in with Vietnam and went out with Desert Storm. I have a son who still serves in the U.S. Air Force as a pilot. If our forefathers were afraid, were too fearful to work through their fear about what would happen with creating this great country that we have, we wouldn't be here today. And what's scarier to me is seeing what's happening and not doing anything. I would ask that you allow us to either succeed or fail. This voice, not only mine, but all of us COS people, okay, forward for all of us, so that H3125 will be voted on in the immediate future so that we can regain and restore this great nation that's of the people, by the people, and for the people. God bless you and God bless America, and thank you for your time and attention.
Well, I've stood at this podium many times about this various bill. It was first filed in 2013, December 3rd, 2013. That's a long time ago. We were the first state to file this piece of legislation. And since then, 15 states have passed it. We have not, but hopefully we will. The issue is simple. Washington is broken, completely dysfunctional. You only have to look at this morning's news or yesterday's news or tomorrow's news to know that it's out of whack completely. Americans have now, look at any survey, have lost confidence in their government. That is not a good thing. It can be fixed, but only you have the power to fix it. I look at you and say, you are, and you'll think I'm overstating this, hyperbole? Not. You are the most important elected officials in America. By the way, that's what our founders intended. Federalism. You know, federalism. The states are in control. The federal government was there to protect us from foreign powers and all of that. Well, in the last certainly 150 years, that's gotten completely out of whack. We now have a mega federal government, command and control, stepping over us, ignoring anything the states want. Folks, we can cure this. It's the only cure that the founders gave us. They knew at the very last, when they inserted this Article 5 in the Constitution, that cherished document, that we states need to be able to propose amendments to the Constitution. Didn't say we're going to rip the Constitution up. We're not going to have a runaway convention, or like the opponents said, silly, their marketing thing is a con. We're not going to have that. I said the jump bar for changing the Constitution by adding amendments to it is very high and very difficult. They couldn't even pass the ERA around the states and get it done. Come on. So what we have now is not the potential of deciding on a runaway convention of states. We have a runaway Congress. Think about that. They are, the con is under the dome of the U.S. Capitol right now. They propose somewhere between 75, 80 or more amendments to the Constitution every session. Fortunately, there isn't even enough wisdom up there. They can't get the needed votes to get those out to the states. But even if they did, and this convention of states, when it comes together with each state having one vote, the possibility of getting an amendment limiting the federal government is still very high. 3/4 of the states have to pass it. And not only that, both the House and the Senate in each of those. So it only takes one body in there not to stop it, okay? So nonsense is not going to happen. But we do need to take control, and you have the power to do that. Pass this bill today to full judiciary, and full judiciary then can look at this bill and hopefully get it to us on the House floor. This is the only fix. Our founders are speaking to us from their graves. They left us a message in Article 5. Fix an overbloated, out-of-control federal government. Thanks for your consideration.
Amy Hill, Convention of States. I'm the State Media Coordinator, and I am here with House Representative 22 Jason Elliott. And we're going to talk a little bit about Convention of States and what the state messaging is supposed to be for the volunteers. Jason, give us a little rundown of state messaging and how we can help push this forward.
Well, Convention of States is critically important for really saving our country. And state legislators have a vital role in that. It's in the U.S. Constitution in Article 5 that it is the responsibility of the state legislatures across the country to step in when the federal government is out of control. And that's what we have now with spending and overreach. So we need South Carolinians to contact their state reps and their state senators and say, get on board with the Convention of States. We passed it in the House Judiciary Committee this past spring. We're going to need to pass it again in 2021 to add South Carolina to the list of states that has passed Convention of States.
Do you have any wisdom for everybody as far as getting in touch with their legislator? What's more effective? Letters, phone calls, emails?
All of the above. If you can make
That takes us to the top of page 28, H 4944. The reading clerk will read.
Say bill relating to meetings of the Coastal Carolina University Board of Trustees so as to provide mandatory notice of board meetings must be sent either electronically or through the U.S. mail to each trustee not less than 5 days before each meeting.
Senator from Greenville, Senator Corbin.
Point of order.
State your point.
This bill is in violation of Rule 39.
Your point is sustained. That takes us to Senate resolutions. S 1122 by the senator from Edgefield. The clerk will read.
Senate resolution to recognize May 2022 as Better Hearing and Speech Month in South Carolina.
Pending question is adoption of the resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. Resolution is unanimously adopted. Takes us to S 1143, further on page 28. The reading by the Senator Johnson. Reading clerk will read.
Senate resolution to recognize March 2022 as Rare Kidney Disease Awareness Month in South Carolina.
The pending question is the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. The resolution is adopted. That takes us further now on page 29 of the calendar. S 1085 under concurrent resolutions by the Senator from Marion and others. The reading clerk will read.
Current resolution requesting the Department of Transportation name the roundabout located on Gascony Road in the city of Marion the James M. Jordan Sr. Roundabout and direct appropriate signs and markers.
The pending question is the adoption of the concurrent resolution. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and it is adopted. That completes the call of the uncontested calendar. We're now in the motion period. Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, I move to set for special order S-133. That is the Senate Article 5 resolution. However, our plan is to use that as the vehicle to do the balanced budget amendment. I'd move to set that for special order.
Pending question is setting S-133 for special order. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Ayes have it.
Mr. President.
S-133 is set for special order. Senator from Edgefield, what purpose do you rise?
Move to dispense with the balance of the motion period.
Motion is to dispense with the balance of the motion period. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. Ayes have it. We're dispensed with the rest of the motion period. That takes us to the bottom of page 3. Special order H-3205. The reading clerk will read.
Joint resolution to make application to the Congress of the United States to call a convention for purposes proposing amendments to the Constitution, limited to proposing amendments that impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office of its officials.
Pending question is third reading of the resolution of the special order H-3205. Those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. It receives H-3205 receives a third reading. Senator from Edgefield, Senator Massey, what purpose do you rise?
Mr. President, could I be recognized to make some comments about next week's work schedule?
You're recognized for announcement to the body. Please give the Senator from Edgefield your attention.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just real quick, I just want to kind of give everybody a little bit of a guidepost of what we're looking at. I've talked with the president, talked with Senator from Orangeburg, and
If you have stuck with us this whole way, you have successfully seen the South Carolina Senate pass Convention of States on third reading on a voice vote. If you blinked, you missed it. Thank you for sticking with us for so long. We weren't sure quite when they were going to come up for us, vote on us, that is. And so we are through the Senate, and it now goes back to the South Carolina House for concurrence. And for those of you that might not know, it did pass through the House last year. But since the Senate subcommittee changed some of the language to make it conform more closely to the other states and strip out a sunset clause, it will need concurrence from the South Carolina House for final passage. So we are very hopeful that that will happen very soon and that South Carolina will be the 19th state. Thanks again, guys, and have a great week. We hope to announce another victory from South Carolina very soon to make South Carolina number 19.